Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fairfield Board of Finance Quarterly Review Meeting for the quarter ending December 31st, 2012. Please rise, everybody, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask Mrs. LeClaire to lead us in the pledge tonight.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We had a couple of members, Mrs. Albin and Mr. DeWitt, send their regrets due to some conflicts they had tonight. People are trying to get some things done before we head into a heavy series of meetings that starts this coming month for the budget. But tonight is to talk about the current year and our agenda. No voting items this evening. There's to approve the minutes of a special meeting of the Board of Finance from January 15th, to hear a top 10 committee report on the Fairfield Senior Center. This is a report that was also shared with the Board of Selectmen, and I just thought we should hear this. To review the current status of our town's pension funds, as we've done quarterly for quite some time now. To review the Board of Education financial position versus the budget as of Q2 fiscal year 13. A note on this item. Dr. Title did contact me, asked if he needed to be here tonight. They've had a rather lengthy series of meetings recently and been tied up with a lot of things. Hearing nothing from this board, I had told them that it was fine. We could follow up with them if anything came up. They also have gotten into the habit of preparing and distributing to us a very good summary report of the variances in their budget year to date. So we'll rely on that this evening. Item number 5, to review the town's financial position versus budget as of December 31st. Item 6, to review any follow-up request documents. This comes from prior meetings to make sure that we're staying on task with our follow-up items. And the last item is to hear, consider, and act upon any other communications. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns from board members? Great. Seeing none, we'll go right to the first item on the agenda to approve the minutes of the special meeting, which were in our package. Any questions, comments, concerns on those minutes? All right, we do have a number of members that were absent that evening. I guess if you were absent, you should probably abstain. Do I have a motion to accept these minutes? Mr. Bolito, do I have a second? Mr. Brown? Any questions, comments, concerns? None? All in favor of these minutes? Opposed? Abstentions? Let it show that the item passed with Mrs. LeClaire abstaining. Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to item number 2 on the agenda, to hear the top 10 committee report on the Fairfield Senior Center. Please come on up. Welcome. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And please identify yourselves.
Selma Cohen, I'm Chairman of the Human Services Commission, and we're really happy that you've given us this opportunity to present Dr. DeAngelis, Chairman of the Top 10 Committee, and hear the passion and about the hard one-year work in creating an amazing report. You all have copies?
Yes, I think we do.
But to tell you that the Human Services Commission also received it and reviewed it and unanimously voted for a second position at the Senior Center, to be a Senior Center Director, and to consider a feasibility study on the location, relocation, or whatever a feasibility study might look into. And I turn it right over to the amazing top study people.
Good
I
evening.
just want to, I know Mrs. Grace is here, and you've retired from your position, correct? You extended a little? Well, that's great. Please feel free to come up and
You don't
join
need
at the
me here,
table if you'd like. Extend that courtesy.
I'm
Okay. Sure.
Good
Sir.
evening. I'm Richard DeAngelis. I've been involved with the Senior Center since about the year 2000 as a volunteer. As a result, I guess, of a meeting that Selectman Tetro had when he first came into office to visit the Senior Center, he had a conversation with Mrs. Grace, and she pointed out to him the leaky roof and a few other deficiencies. and he suggested that she put together a list of the top 10 things that need to be done. So she asked me if I would chair a committee, and I agreed to. And when we sat together, we picked about 7 or 8 people. And as we sat down and began to do this, we realized that it was not just a list of you need a couple of adult-sized commodes in the bathrooms because it was an elementary school, and you need another computer and some curtains, and it was much more than that. So what we really decided that we ought to take a look at other senior centers in the area, in the state, and see what they're doing. A little background on this is important because our senior center, the Fairfield Senior Center, a number of years ago was turned over to the Woodfield Family Services to be administered. They ran the lunch program there. And that's basically what they did. Mrs. Grace is a half-time person. She wears 2 hats in her job. One is the Director of Human Services, and the other is Director of the Senior Center. Now, that's an unusual position because every senior center we visited, and several of the other ones that I have personally visited, all have full-time directors of the senior center alone. Well, as a result, anyway, of that meeting, we went out and started visiting senior centers. And if you read the report, you can see there's a tremendous difference in these senior centers. Wallingford, of course, is the Taj Mahal, we call it, because it's a huge building. It's a beautiful building. But they have $1 million budget. If you look at this, you see budgets are, of course, in every town done in different ways. Some include custodians, some don't include custodians. But we found that in all of these other centers, that they have anywhere from 3 to 6 full-time personnel and 2 or 3 to 6 or 8 part-time personnel, not counting custodians. It's a common thing to have one person who is part-time to handle public relations for the center, another person who is part-time in some of the centers to serve as a bursar. We have one secretary who does all that, the only full-time person at our center. In studying these various centers, the thing that impressed me the most was that because our center had been administered really by the Family Woodfield Services, we had slipped behind. Changes were taking place. You know, the baby boomers are coming on very fast, 10,000 a month. In another 3 or 4 years, it's going to be a significant change. By the year 2030, which is not that far away, it's going to be a more than 50% increase in people over 65. And senior centers have changed in their role. They initially, when ours was started some 30-some-odd years ago, basically they tended to an audience that was largely, many of whom were not even high school graduates. We helped them with their medical forms and their tax forms and applying for this and applying for that. That's changed. The baby boomers now they're healthier, they're living longer, and in all these other senior centers we've seen, and some of you have visited Westport and these other places, the emphasis has shifted to recreational, to social and recreational. At our senior center, of course, we have the social services workers who handle those kinds of problems. But we haven't had the kind of director that is common today in these senior centers, who has more social and recreational background. And in many cases, I've talked to the people, they said, well, they just acquired it over 20 or 30 years. As the changes came on and the needs, they adjusted to the changes. We didn't have a full-time person, and we didn't have that financial support and personnel, the staff support to make those changes. I had occasion to take Selectman Tetro to Westport not too long ago for lunch to show him what it was like. I think he was quite impressed. If you've been to the Westport Senior Center for lunch, you go in and it's like a hotel or a restaurant. You sit down and you are seated at a tablecloth with flowers and served by volunteers. It's a very different experience than many other senior centers. But not the ones we visited. So the 6 centers that we've reported in our report here are not just the best that we found. We decided when we chose these centers, we talked and several people suggested, well, let's use some of the towns that the town of Fairfield has used in its yardstick in past years when it makes other comparisons and judgments. And so that's how we arrived at this list. In addition to the ones in the list, I visited and spoke with the staff at Stratford, Shelton, Trumbull, and a couple of others. So after visiting, and we started a year ago, and just 1 year ago, we spent the summer visiting these centers and talking to staffs. We drafted a questionnaire that we sent to all the places in advance. We met with their staff, and we got additional answers. They were all very helpful, and we compiled this report. Mr. Atwater, who I don't believe is here, did Ron come in? Ron Atwater I have to attribute this fine report to Ron, who had a lot of experience in writing these kinds of corporate reports. But we compile this material. It shows the needs, and it compares us with other centers. So what we have been asking for is hopefully a five-year special interest plan to upgrade the center. We need a full-time director. Now, the Selectman Tetro has said that he will support a full-time director of the senior center in addition to the director of human services. But we also need a couple of other part-time people. We do not have a receptionist. We need the receptionist in these senior centers. They're all very special people. They're all receptionists, and they make people feel good when they come in there. We need something like that. Wallingford has a part-time paid person who is in charge of. They have 160 volunteers, so they have a volunteer coordinator. They raise almost $300,000, and that's the last. I don't want to spend all night, but it's the last thing I want to point out to you, and that is that at many of these other senior centers, their activities, in all of them, with the exception of one or two, when you look at the lowest ones on the least impressive ones in the scale, do not have evening hours. But all the ones that are doing well have at least 1 day a week of evening hours, and sometimes special evening events, and they are open on half-a-day Saturdays. We have never had those benefits. Therefore, we have many people. You saw, I believe, the report that had been done earlier on the Fairfield Senior Center by the research company. I forget the name. It's in here somewhere. Millward Brown, yeah, the Millward Brown report. And that reported that many people didn't know much about the center. And that's especially younger people, because we're not open the hours when working people can come. And so we're looking for some funding so that we can do those things. And we know that we can run the programming that can raise revenue, do many other things in the senior center. And with the changes, the demographic changes that are coming about, Fairfield has to really catch up with the kind of activities that are going on in other senior centers. Wallingford runs 35 trips a year. They don't go to Westchester Theater. They go to Rome. They don't go to the casino. They go to Brazil. I mean, that's the kinds of things they're doing because they've got the staff and the interest. And if you look at the comparison, any comparison, Wallingford, $1 million budget. Their facility's a little smaller than ours. They have a median household income of $72,000. Fairfield has $114,000. They have 40,000 people. We have 59,000 people. And when you see what these other centers are doing, the differences, it can be explained only by one thing. We have not kept up with the needs and with the modern senior centers today. And I'm hoping that this board will take a look at our proposal. We're not asking for the moon in a hurry, but we do think that incrementally over 5 or 6 years, a part-time position here and a part-time position there, we will be able to, and I believe we will be able to raise enough revenue to even run the additional costs of being open on a Saturday morning and an evening. I'll answer any questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions from board members on the report,
Oh,
on the commentary?
I have another board member who would like to speak.
Sure, please.
Palmer Senator.
Come on up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Palmer Senator. I am one of the members for the Top 10 Committee, and I wanted to speak a little bit about the facility itself. The building itself was built in 1953, as you all probably are aware of. It is not set just specifically for the senior center. It is multifunctional. There's a daycare center, and Parks and Recs use it, the building as well. What we have found when we looked at the other facilities, they all had been constructed specifically for the senior center. As Rick has explained, as far as the budgets have gone, we had $1.3 million in Milford as their budget. We have $1 million in Wallingford, and Fairfield's senior center budget is $342,000. It's
Salaries.
that's including salaries. The Millwood Brown also, their report said that when they did and looked around, that people felt the building itself was old, dated. Most boomers think of themselves as not old, let alone dated. So that they need, if we're going to have them coming, we really need to do something to get not only the facility up to the standards of excellence that Fairfield has for all the buildings we have here, with the exception of the senior center. So we really feel that we would like for the town to engage an outside professional firm to do a feasibility study to determine what would be the most cost-effective approach to either renovating the building that is existing, finding another town building that may be available that would accommodate it, or building a whole new building. But again, whatever it is, we don't want really, we feel, compared to the other facilities that we looked at, a patched-up job in the center that we have right now. But that we feel strongly that it would be very, it would be very good to have an outside professional come in and really make that determination. The cost factors, we're not equipped to do that. We could make guesses, but we're really not equipped to do that. I think the town of Fairfield, I think the seniors in this town, who contribute greatly to our taxes and to the resources in this town, they really, I think we need, as a town, to step up and get up to sharing that pie that we have a little more fairly. And thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just
Any
like to
other
add one
questions?
thing.
Mr. Walsh.
And that is that we have done fairly well. I mean, I don't wish to paint a completely bleak picture. Mrs. Grace is in wearing two hats and with a limited budget and certainly a very limited staff. The only full-time person is a secretary. We have a very active Lifetime Learners program, which is run under the auspices of the Elder Hostel. We teach probably, well, I also am associated with the one in Stamford. We offer a full program of college-level courses and special lectures, anything from this morning Chinese religion to oil painting, languages. I'm a professor, retired of Chinese and Japanese history, and I teach courses on Asia. And we have a very lively program there, and people come from other towns for our Lifetime Learners. Many people come. We probably have as many as 200 people enrolled in that program alone. And I do believe that for what we have done quite well, so I don't mean to be negative. We've kept with a limited number of volunteers, we have a very active program. Anytime you walk into that center in the morning, you will be surprised with the number of people and the activities going on. We're just opening now an art gallery so that the people who take art courses at the senior center can display their artwork. And I just would say this, that for these people, it's very different. This is not just a place to go hang out. You know, the image that Millwood Brown said that they found people saying that it was a place for octogenarians to go and get a free lunch, and it's really not. It's a very active place, and for many people, it's therapy. They go. It's a social group. They make crafts. They play cards. They play pool. They play ping pong. they listen to a lecture, they watch a movie, and it's a very important part of their life. And we hope that someday we can match what Wallingford does and have our own chef and put out a really super lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a couple questions. Maybe Mr. Walsh.
With the changes you're proposing for fiscal year 13, what would be the total increase in your budget then from from last year to what you're proposing for this year?
I had that, and I think it's $116,000. And that's the new position, the difference in the position for the incoming person and the new director of the senior center. I believe it's $116,000.
Okay, and the repair work to the building that you want done, are you proposing that that be done in
No,
fiscal year 13?
we haven't suggested any repair work to the building other than necessary maintenance, and that the building is now on what is called a maintenance basis. But we would like to have this feasibility study because we believe that professionals should look at it and make a determination about whether this building is worth investing money in or whether we should just hold off and put up an entirely new building when the time comes.
Does the numbers you said includes benefits for a full-time position? Does that include pension contributions?
I don't know that, sir. Because we're volunteers. I don't have the budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the first selectman, are you putting any of this money into your budget for this coming year? Because there seems to be, this gentleman thinks you made a commitment to have a full-time director. Is this 116,000, these positions, all going to be planned for you to be filled for this coming fiscal year?
Good evening, Mr. Tetra. Thanks for coming tonight.
There's Mike.
With the qualifier that the budget is still under development, we are looking at putting the full-time director into the budget this year, yes.
How about any of the other positions?
Again, the budget is still under development, so we're taking a look at all that.
Okay, have you read this report? Do you support these positions, or just the full-time director at this point in time?
Mr. Walsh, the budget is still under development. The full-time director, I think, is key. The other ones we're taking a look at.
All right. And your budget will be out when?
You'll be the first to know. February 19th, I think it comes before this board.
Okay. I guess we'll find out.
If I may.
Sure.
Back to the facility. We don't have bathrooms that are ADA compliant. Even though there was a renovation done, and we made it very pretty, we had the hall painted for the first time in 20 years recently, but we're not up to the compliancy. And so maybe some of those things, might have to be taken care of soon. But the idea was not to spend money not knowing really where and what is going to be done on a long-term basis. Somebody referred to the population of the seniors, the boomers coming into effect in 2030 as a senior tsunami. And it's growing rapidly. And so we have to look to the future. We don't want to throw money away for just quick fixes. That's why we really feel strongly about a feasibility study.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, we'll go to Mr. Stone. And then we'll go to Mr. Brown.
I'm actually about to join your ranks as a senior citizen in June. The question I have is, I'm sure you've seen or heard about all the budget issues that we have in town. And I was wondering, and you talked about maybe building a new facility, all right? Would you be open to a public-private partnership? In other words, you raise some of the money, a substantial amount of the money?
I would say that we've discussed this. I'm president of the Fairfield Senior Center Association Board of Directors, which is just a group of volunteers.
Right.
We do not make policy for the senior center. We are not. Someone referred to us as the Board of Directors. No, we're not. We're just the volunteers. Now we do consider. We run the gift shop that's there and do other kinds of things, and we raise some funds. In recent years, it's dwindled off because some of our craft makers have left us, but. We have been discussing creating a Friends for the Senior Center. And that's I think that's a very viable possibility. But that would take some time to put in place. And I think with the new director coming in, much of this we are waiting to see what the new director who is coming to replace Mrs. Grace, we certainly don't want to get in that person's way, and it's going to take some time for us to express our ideas and what we like, and that person's management style to mesh. But I do think that's a possibility, absolutely. A Friends of the Senior Center would, just as they have for the library, would be a very real one.
I liked your answer.
They did that in Westport as well. They had gotten the town very involved, and the townspeople, I should say. So it was really a community effort to building the new center they had there. However, the town did support it with quite a bit of money. But it was very much of an involved community effort, and definitely, I think we were all would definitely want to do that.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you.
Parkville.
Before I ask you my question, now that I know that Mr. Stone is about to join your ranks, do you have a guest policy on lunch for friends, younger friends who want to join a senior for lunch at the facility?
The policy on lunch is, I believe you have to call a day or two beforehand, but if you call the senior center and would like to come and join us for lunch, we'd be happy to have you. At full price.
Okay.
Well,
Maybe I get one of those 2-for-1
As a matter of fact, as this is before you now for consideration, I would hope that some of you might be able to find the time to stop in the senior center and take a closer look at it. Because what we're asking for are very modest changes, and in particular, since these are the first changes to come in that center for almost 15 years.
Let me ask you, if I could.
Yes.
A question. First of all, you said the Human Services Commission accepted the report. Who is the Human Services Commission?
I'm the chairman of the Human Services Commission.
Okay.
There are 9 members. We meet monthly. The top 10 committee began from us and from Mrs. Grace, from Claire. Pardon me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're charged by the items charging us in the charter. We're responsible for senior services and social services, the social workers in the town of Fairfield, and they're located in the senior center, the social workers. And we make policy, but while Family Service Woodfield was in charge, things ran smoothly, effectively, but everything about the location was neglected thoroughly.
So while you're here, so you said there's 9 people on the Human Services Board, and you're a commissioner.
Human
You're the
Services
chairman?
Commission.
The commission. I'm sorry. And you're the
Yeah,
chairman.
yes.
Chairperson. I'm sorry.
Right.
And
I'm
so
a chairman.
how are those other 8, or including you, is it appointed by the first selectman, or how does the?
They're appointed by the charter by the first selectman.
Okay.
Yes, 4-year term.
Are all the people seniors on the commission?
No,
Okay.
they have been in the past, notoriously so, but now it's a very pleasant mixture. It's
No, I
nice.
wasn't saying it wasn't pleasant. I was just
So-
thinking that if we're going to do something for the future, that we should have people who
Definitely.
obviously aren't only
We
current
have
seniors.
2 or 3 that are
Right.
a lot younger than I am.
Okay.
Okay.
And this question is to any of you guys.
Okay.
So one thing I'm interested in is, you mentioned something about the younger seniors are starting to enter the group. Is there any, when you, first about Fairfield and then about the other centers, do you guys have some sort of like check-in procedure? Are people registered to be at the senior center? Like, do you know, like each day who goes? And
I'll answer that. We have had a registration procedure. The building makes it difficult because, it's a former school, and as an elementary school, it has exit doors for every classroom. And we find one of the difficulties is that people come to play ping pong or to shoot pool, and their friends let them in the door, and so we don't get any kind of a head count. But our estimates are fairly reliable, and I think we probably have somewhere between 225 and 275 people who use that facility
Right, what I was
on
trying
a
to
pretty
get at
regular basis.
was the age. In other words, what I'm interested
The
in
age.
is if you actually had people who were registered and had a card or something, when they came in,
Most of our
checked
people,
in.
most of our people are over 65. They're 70 and 75 and up. We observe the NA's AARP age 50 as a senior, but we find
That's
that,
what you were referring to, right?
but we find that
Tragically, that's not. I'm sorry.
most of the people are retired. And as I said, it's a changing group, because the older ones, the 85-year-olds now who grew up during World War II, many of them didn't have the kind of education that many Fairfield residents have now.
Right.
So the boomers, the 60-year-olds today, are looking for different kinds of things.
Well, what I'm concerned about, and I'm probably a little ahead of myself, because I think you guys have talked about further studies, and I think that's wonderful. We shouldn't jump to any conclusions and make any rash decisions, obviously, is that what I'd like to know, if we go forward with something, would be either through our own research of our own people, or more importantly, maybe what's going on at your other centers that you checked, is there interest from 55-year-old people and 60-year-old people to use a senior center? My guess is there isn't. So, and I could be wrong, but you mentioned people who are working full-time, you wanted to have evening activities for them and so forth. I'm just asking the question. I think we'd have to empirically prove that there's demand for a person who takes the train and works, 8 hours and spends another hour on each end commuting, and then they want to go to the senior center in the evening on a weeknight. I think that's probably a little far-fetched. I would rather spend our money where it's really needed, which is probably with the seniors that are a little older, who are probably retired from full-time work, and who are able to get some use out of the facility.
Well, we're currently putting in a database called My Senior Center that we had seen at other facilities, and it will gather the information and that we can come up with now actual numbers and so forth. As far as a younger group of people coming there, as I've said in the past, if you build it, they will come. They're not going to come to what you have right now. What we saw, I believe, in the other facilities, it was modern, it was updated, it was much more social, and they had a nice little restaurant. Aside from the congregate lunches that they provide, they had a little cafe. So it's much more social than what we really are seeing with the older, I don't want to say the older generation. They have their groups, but the facility itself is not, the way it stands now, is not geared for really socializing. You're in with your group, and then you have your lunch, and then you leave. But as far as having dances, and also intergenerational activities, not that it's, Wallingford was wonderful at that. This was their senior center, but when it was time for graduation with the elementary school, they came there, they had their graduation. They have some activities that if the seniors are not using it. It does not lend to that type of environment. Westport, you would see younger people there.
But I think when you have the space and the staff to bring a variety of people, a cross-section, Lifetime Learners does that. And they're not all,
Right.
retired individuals. It's a cross-section of interested people, very much a cross-section of the town in Fairfield. And they come for the subject matter, and it's true, they don't stay, but it's what we offer, that we're able to offer. There are people.
I'm not.
No, I understand. I
The
agree.
reason I'm asking is that it's as much of
Yeah.
a recommendation to you as anything else, is
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
are in an extremely difficult budget.
I
period.
know that.
Everybody knows that.
Right.
And I would say that we're not, I don't speak for the board, I speak for myself. I don't think anybody's against spending, or investing is a better
Right.
word. But I think that going forward, at least for me, there's going to have to be a lot more hard empirical evidence.
Right.
Not just like, it would be nice if 55-year-olds could use it. I'd have to be shown proof, as much as you
Right.
could, empirically, that there is a demand from a working 55-year-old who might want to use the center, if we're going to spend money on some aspect of the center that's directed at them, right?
Yeah.
So I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, but
No, but
that's my suggestion to you.
I think I understand your concern, and if I may say this, right now, most of the senior centers that we visit have seniors. They're 65 and generally up. They do run special activities. What they're trying to do now is to break in the newer generation to come in, to become volunteers, so that they will be replacing the ones who will be leaving. We just, as mentioned, we just bought this because we have a difficulty with it. We needed to have 2 machines. This My Senior Center is a computer-based data system. It has a monitor, and each person will have a little fob like you have at Home Depot or whatever, those little plastic things that go on your keychain. They wave that in front of the screen, and then they can punch in their activities for the day. The machine then will log and keep track of all this information. So we will know exactly who does what on any given day, how many times they do that a month or each week. We will know how many people play pool and how many people do this and that will print out databases that we have never had up until now. So that is part of your answer. I think it's part of it. The second thing is, we're not going to be able to get the 55-year-olds or 60-year-olds now until we open up those doors on a weekend or a night evening, because as you say, they're coming back at 7 o'clock on the train. But I suspect if you could have an evening where you could bring in, say, somebody this Marciano who just wrote this book on baseball, okay, and brought Marciano in as a speaker, you might get some people to come in and hear that lecture. You might get some people to come in and hear a lecture on a veteran who spent, on a military officer who spent 2 years in Iraq. Another view of Iraq. So I think, these are all the things that are happening in other senior centers. My plea is because our center has been neglected up until now. We understand the financial straits of the town of Fairfield. But I'm simply saying, I think it's time that somebody takes a look at this and says, we're going to have to make some changes in the future.
I appreciate it, and for what it's worth, I think you're on the right track. And,
Thank you.
Doing a further study that really empirically brings this stuff out will give us reasons to look more forward at it. One last question, Tom, I apologize. You mentioned revenue. I'm just curious. You said you thought if the center was open at certain other times, you might bring in some revenue that would offset the cost. What kind of revenue?
Well, if we were open in the evening, for example, we know we could offer computer classes. We get calls from people who are working, and they know if they could upgrade their computer skills, they could improve their job status. We have people who are very competent to teach computer classes, and those classes can generate money. Give you an idea, last year, our total revenue at the Senior Center was $1,500, because we don't have these things going on at night. Wallingford's generated revenue that the Senior Center generates with all its volunteers and its activity is $300,000. They get $700,000 from the town. So there's enormous potential there for the Senior Center to become self-feeding, but it needs a staff, and it needs the hours, and it needs a little bit of paint and patch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr.
Staff
Brown?
is really what's critical for the growth,
Yeah.
to enable more use of what we actually have.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you. I think you've all done an excellent job of putting this together. Obviously, you've done your research. It's taken a year to get the information, and you've laid it out very nicely. I think the site visits were an excellent idea, because you can see what people are doing right, but also what maybe they're not doing right. And I'm looking, you've mentioned Wallingford, but I'm looking at Greenwich. That's a fairly decent budget, but it's rated poor. And I'm curious on what maybe you've learned on what maybe not investing their money right, or what aren't they doing that maybe Wallingford is, or Westport.
Well, Greenwich is a peculiar case because it's in the old town hall, which is located in the center of Greenwich. I know the city, but not well. We visited it. It has about 6 parking spaces, and those parking spaces are checked carefully by the police frequently. So it's really not accessible to people. The second thing I will tell you is that I was not impressed because they get a $700,000 budget, and the person we spoke to at that facility had the attitude, well, we're here, we have it. If they come, they come. If they don't come, we don't come. I don't care. And that's not our attitude. We beat the bushes. We know that we don't have the Taj Mahal, but we work very hard at trying to get volunteers in to do things. And as I said, we're opening this little art gallery. We're doing new kinds of things. For the first time, Fairfield Senior Center is running some community-based programs in the evening. But Greenwich was a great disappointment to us. Now, New Fairfield is a very small place. Monroe is a very small place. Shelton is a very small place. We're heads above those because of our programming and because of our lifetime learning, and I think that because of what we accomplished with the leadership we do have. I mean, we have Mrs. Grace is part-time.
No, thank you. I would just say that And I agree, you're on the right track, is when you review the budget, you say, for this 116, this is what we're going to get, and these are the improvements that we're going to make, and then, looks like you have a 3-year plan at least.
3 to 5 years we were talking.
Right.
Mhm.
And then how we're going to build upon it over the 3 years. It can't just be one shot,
No,
1 year.
no.
But what are we going to get after 3 years? And then how much? You know, there's an overall plan here.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the things to give you an idea. Now, we didn't want to lay this out because we didn't feel it was our job to do this. And the second thing is that it happens to be this year that Mrs. Grace is retiring. Now, if she was staying on, we could work out a plan, but we know a new person's coming in, and that person's got to have room to implement their own ideas. But we felt that if we had a full-time director, the next thing we would look for would be a receptionist, and then another part-time clerk, because we have only one part-time clerk in the morning, and she leaves at noon, and there's nobody there in the afternoon except the one secretary, and she's treasurer, bursar, everything else. She answers the phone, she does all kinds of things. So we really need us to slowly build a staff. Wallingford has 6 full-time people and something like 14 part-time people paid. We're not looking for that, but what we're looking for is we realize if we justify the numbers and the need in the programs, and we ask for another part-time person, and someone can say, okay, we can't do it this year, but we'll put it in for next year. As it is now, there's been no growth in that. We have a program director has come in part-time, Margaret Andrews, and she's doing some outreach work, and she actually got the Millward Brown. We got that Millward Brown report free, and she got a friend to pay for the postage. We did this report, and you gentlemen, I'm sure, could estimate what it would cost if you brought in outside consultants to do this. So we think, that we're trying to do the right thing to alert people that we really, it's a call for help. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Polito, then Mrs. Leclerc, and then I have a couple of questions myself.
Thank you very much, and excellent job on the report. It was very informative, and it certainly, I learned a lot by reading it. I did have a couple of follow-up questions, though. It seems to me the 2 biggest obstacles you're facing are your facility and the lack of full-time personnel. Which do you view as the larger obstacle?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think if you put the staff we have now into the Wallingford Center, we couldn't run it.
Okay.
Okay, so you have to have the staff.
Right.
And I think with the staff, we will build a program that will obviously make the need for either complete building renovation or a new facility
The commission
necessary.
would agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
it has to start with enough people to make things happen.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
I also think, if I may, I also think, though, it's got to be a balancing act.
Sure.
I think that would be important, but definitely we need staff.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. That's good to know. In the towns that you visited that you consider to be top echelon, the places like Wallingford, Westport, what I'm curious about is what level of coordination did you see in those towns between the senior center and other town departments that provided similar services for different citizens, like the library, park and rec, the health department? I'm curious to see what lessons you learned in terms of the coordination, because one of the things I think in Fairfield, we have so many great organizations with so many programs, and I think it's almost overwhelming to people, where do you go? So the coordination sometimes I think is a little lacking here. What did you find in the towns that you consider to be successful?
Well, a couple of the places have more, what do you call it, health fitness rooms.
Right.
Sophisticated machinery in the health fitness rooms. But we have, Fairfield had, the rec department has a whole health fitness thing, so we would not be looking to duplicate that. In Milford, in West Hartford, their building is attached. It's contiguous to the public library, which is being renovated. Now, the interesting thing is that people come to the library, and they just can go directly from the library through the senior center. And so that brings a great flow of traffic, sometimes just cutting through, but it brings a great flow of traffic. We found that it's difficult because not in all cases did we get all of their complete budgets, and budgets are, they're done different ways, that certainly. And so what we found was that in places like Wallingford, there were other groups in town that did things. For example, they had a group of people, like they had an Irish society. They had a musical group. They gave music lessons. They teach music there. They have a little ensemble that plays music, and they would run dances in the evening. So they would have a St. Patrick's dance
And they would do that at the senior center.
at the senior center, and it would be a party. It's in a party atmosphere. They had school children come in to decorate their lobby and their Christmas tree. I mean, those are kinds of things that we could do, but the fact is we don't even have the staff for that. The full-time and the part-time secretary are so busy all the time that if, for example, we wanted to open up on a Saturday morning, we do not have a budget to pay somebody to be responsible for the building, a custodian or whatever, because that would cost about $90 a morning. So we're kind of we're hamstrung here with a lack of budget to do the kind of things that we really have the potential to do.
So it seems to me that speaks to the need for a full-time director, because that person will be able to coordinate with other town departments and other private organizations so that
Absolutely.
you're getting the maximum bang for your buck and utilizing the other services that are already available in town.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, and this is important, that the job has changed over the years. Now, Westport has Westport has hired now as an assistant director a young woman who's got training in resorts and recreation. Okay, so that senior center director is a different job today than it was 30 years ago.
Right.
They're not overseeing social workers and nurses and so on. They're really running these entertaining programs, cruises and trips and all kinds of other things. So it's very different. And the person that comes in for that job, I'm hoping, will have that kind of background and experience.
It almost sounds like they would benefit from having a background in hospitality.
Yes.
That's the kind of
everything
thing.
else.
Yeah.
A new senior center director, a new line on the budget that we're praying for faithfully, is going to write grants. There's going to be time for a full-time person to be able to do that. They're out there. We just have to have somebody to grab at them.
Yeah.
We haven't had that.
Yeah.
Just have one other quick question for the first selectman, if that's okay. Mr. Tetro, we've been talking about a feasibility study. What I want to know is concretely, what is the next step to get that accomplished so that we can come up with a plan of action for the next 5 to 7 years? What would the next step be?
You want to sit here, Mike?
The immediate next step is, as you asked earlier, is the number one issue is staffing. So we're taking a look at the staffing in terms of what we can handle in this year's budget to do that. When we have the new director on board, we'll also take a look. One of the great things is having reached out to a cadre of other senior centers, we now have some models to go look at. We can go look at what they do. All the services, all the programs aren't the same. Some of these are addressed in different ways. I've been impressed both in terms of reading the report and having a chance to visit one. I'm going to get out and visit some of the other centers so we can look at what it takes place there. I think in the short term, we have time to take a look at the facility in terms of what it needs. I think as we look at our capital planning needs and the pressures on the town in that regard, I'm not sure we have the land or the site right away, though there's some options in terms of perhaps the Armory site that comes up. So there may be some options that we look at down the road, and we don't want to walk away from anything like that. But I think this step one is to get the foundation staff in place so we have people that can take this report. What the great thing about this report is it gives us a vision. It gives us a checklist to kind of look at, here's what other people do. Let's look at what makes sense in Fairfield. There are things we do that other groups don't do. Getting more use out of the existing facility, I think, is step one. We want to make sure that it's like any capital asset. You want to make sure that you're getting your dollars per hour out of it. It's not used on weekends. You go to Westport, their Friends Group funds concerts on Sunday afternoons. What a great way to bring people back. What a great way to take advantage of a mix. We do some of those concerts in the park in the summer with our Parks and Rec department. They're very well attended. Boy, we could add that into the senior center too. There's so many ideas that come out of this. So that whole idea of prioritizing, really, we're really looking to the senior center director to help us do that.
Thank you.
Mrs. Leclerc. Thank you, Mr. Tedrow.
I think Rob covered most of what I was going to ask, but I just wanted to say thank you for the report. It's very helpful. And I did have a question. Did you look at the Easton Senior Center? Because I know a lot of our Fairfield seniors do go up to Easton, And the feedback I've gotten from them is that they have more staff, so they're treated very nicely. And so that goes back to what you're looking for.
I'm familiar with the Easton Center, and Val, who runs that center. They have a large staff of volunteers that, over the years, a huge core of volunteers that she's built up over the years. They don't get a large town budget by any means, but I don't know if you know that what they've done is they do a very special niche. They started doing auctions years and years ago. And from auctions, they went to doing estates. And a very good friend of mine and his wife run their estates program. They now have, it's almost a given thing. If some member of the center's family dies and there's an estate to be sold off, the senior center does it. And they used to haul all the stuff into the senior center, and then they found out that was kind of crazy because they had to open up special on a Saturday, and then what they didn't sell, they had to then haul back somewhere. So now they've actually worked it out so they go to the houses. When the house is vacated, before it's sold, they conduct an auction at the house, and it's been very, very profitable for them. Plus, their crafts program has raised considerable money. But they don't have a large town budget. They do quite well. I mean, they have a budget for their staff, and they have more staff than we have. But they do extraordinarily well with this niche they've created for themselves in the auctions. I wish we had it.
Thank you. And then I had one other question on the facility. Every now and then over the past few years when we were doing school buildings and new buildings would come up and they wanted to build at Mona Terrace property. There was always pushback from the seniors that they didn't want their center touched. They liked where they were. So do you anticipate that would be a problem, or do you think the seniors are now open if we renovate a facility or move them to a new location?
I'm unaware about the seniors pushing back, but I'm relatively new to the center. It was my understanding that it was a question as to whether or not the schools actually wanted to take over the building, and the schools didn't want to. Now, I don't know if that's accurate, but that's just my understanding. I didn't think so much it was the seniors that were pushing back against it. I could be wrong.
Sort of thought it was both, but okay.
Well, the question was that would they convert that building back to a school? And when they did, the seniors did push back. They became concerned because no one was saying what they would do with the seniors then. All the talk was turning it back to a school, and there was no one saying, well, this is what we'll offer the seniors. The other thing about the building is, I guess the study that was done showed, because of it's in the wetlands area, the tidal basin, that it would cost so much to convert that back to a school that it wasn't feasible. It's always amazed me. I mean, frankly, I'll be honest with you, I don't understand how you can't use it as an elementary school for 8 and 10-year-olds, but we're running a toddler school in there for 1 and 2-year-olds in a wetland school. And it seems to me that the 10-year-olds will be able to get out of the building in an emergency a lot faster than the 2-year-olds could. It's a little contradiction there.
Okay, I guess I'm good.
Okay, anybody else? First of all, I want to thank you guys for coming here tonight. I also want to thank you for the hard work that you did putting the committee together and putting the report together. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for use of the facility on a Saturday morning in March, as we usually hold one of our budget open forums there. So we all greatly appreciate that. Also, my understanding is, I think on Monday night, the RTM approved a new version of senior citizen tax relief, and we hope that that assists the seniors in town a bit more with the financial burden. From my own perspective, I want to say how I feel about this process. It's kind of a mix of what I've heard as we've talked about it here this evening, and that is, I think this report was very well done, and I want to thank you for the time and effort that went into it, particularly benchmarking, which this board has been a huge fan of as compared to many other communities. One of the things that I would like to see come out of this now is if a new director is hired in whatever form that takes as they go through this process, is a longer-term strategic plan that actually ends with a business plan. Because as everybody knows, we are facing an area of dwindling resources. And huge pressures on town finances, and state finances, and federal finances, and personal finances. So that I want to make sure that when it comes back and we're considering something, that we've done the strategic plan and have the long-term vision and factored in many of the things like Mr. Brockfeld said, as well as we have kind of the business plan as to how we go about doing that in the most efficient way possible. I was lucky enough to be asked 5 or 6 years ago to be involved in a long-term planning process for the town libraries. And I thought that was a very good process. I don't know that the current director of the town libraries was not there at the time, but I think they followed a lot of the recommendations that came out of that plan. I would also note that the Golf Commission actually put together a 10-year strategic plan and presented that to us a couple of years ago. And every time they come back to us now, we refer back to that strategic plan. We refer back to, hey, we're following the plan here. This is what we're doing. And over the 10-year period, and this is what the finances look like over the last couple of years and how it's doing. And whomever comes in and takes over, I would hope they would avail themselves of the resources that this committee brought to bear, and perhaps a larger committee or different committee or the same committee could bring to bear, and actually put together a vision statement and a strategy and a business plan that helps us get there and understands what are the opportunities for more financing, for more revenue, for more interaction with, parks and recreation,
Perfect.
adult
Right.
education. Mr. Tetro brings out the concerts. All that has to be part of a long-term vision for the facility. And that's what I would like to see when it comes back before us at some point, for whatever that might be. So, does anybody have any other comments on this? All right. Hey, thank you for your time and your attention, and we appreciate all your hard work. And Mrs. Claire, thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right. Item number 3 on the agenda is to review the current status of the town's pension plans. Do we have members of the pension boards here? Mr. Vahey, welcome. Thank you for your patience.
Do you have a copy of the flash?
So we have in our package, we received the report from Callan. So, Mr. Tetro, feel free if you want to come up, because I know you serve on the pension boards as well, so feel free. Mr. Vahey, do you want to
Well,
turn it over to you?
we still have a pension, and from the last time someone came to speak with you, I think the dollar totals are probably up about, I guess it's right here, a few $1 million by year end. And as far as operationally, the only changes we have made is we reviewed our fixed income managers because there is a change in management to one, and we have moved, as you can see here under domestic fixed on page 2, small dollar amount for a large outflow from GSAM, which was actually Dwight Asset Management in Burlington. They were bought by GSAM, and we moved it to Montgomery U.S. Core Fixed Income. And also, we just finished in the last monthly meeting a review of our equity strategy, because it was noted in all of our reviews that the distribution that we had with regards to the standard equity indices was, we didn't line up exactly, and we didn't have the, sort of what our intent was written down. So we reviewed the whole policy, and we have decided to actually shift out of a couple of managers and go to a partially passive strategy, which will save us a lot of money in fees in the large cap space, and that will take place probably by the next time. We're not choosing any new managers, we're just rearranging money within them, and so you'll see that change take place by the time the next meeting or the next review occurs. And as you can see, our allocations with regards to targets are pretty much on, except for an overweight in equity, and that's because we're waiting to get the funding requirement for the private equity, which it's not shown here, but it's a Mesro fund of funds in private equity, and they have not requested funding yet, and at which time we will take, the plan is to take the money from the domestic equity strategy. Returns-wise, the next page, actually next 2 pages.
2 pages, right. Second page is more helpful, right?
You can see, well, because this is for year-end 2012, you can see that during that last year, the fund returned 12.06. There's a benchmark, which is really a blend of a benchmark for each one of our subcategories, and that's where they get that number from. So we outperform that, which is nice, and you know, and even fiscal year to date, we're also at almost 6.9%, and we still have, you know, pretty much half the year. So it looks good, hopefully, with achieving at least our 7.75 or whatever our target rate return is for the year.
Mr. Mayor, it's 7.5, isn't it?
It stepped. It went from 7.75 for 1 year, and then went to 7.5. I don't know if I got the fiscal years
think
mixed
that's
up,
right.
but it's two steps.
Okay. So you're at 6.9, roughly 6.88 now, on a bogey of 7.5 for the year, per what the pension plan actuarial analysis
And
calls for.
I can anecdotally tell you that
We're above
just
that
based,
now.
yeah, based on January's market returns, would
Who knows where we'll be by year end, but we're above that by now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions so far from board members? Quick question. What was our target? One of the things we talked about, there was and I'm glad to see the targets in line with the mix of assets that we're investing in, so that's good. What was our target in terms of percentage with each individual fund manager? Because there was a little concern with that, given what had happened a few years ago. Was it, remind me, was it under?
I mean, you'd have to refer to the investment policy statement, but I mean, I do not believe, we're not near those levels in any one of these individual ones, but I think it's something like 10%.
Right.
I even think it's higher than that, 15%. Yeah.
I thought it was 10%. That's what, if you'd asked me, that's what I would have said. So in most of these, we're well below that. A couple were.
Yeah, but our
Pretty
fixed
close.
income are always going to be above, I mean,
Right. That doesn't bother me. It's more the Euro, Pacific, and Columbus Circle that are a little bit close, but, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Please.
Hi, Brian. Domestic equity, I haven't gone to any meetings recently, so you're planning to push some of that into ETFs or index funds?
the large caps are going into I believe it's the, I don't know if it's the S&P 500. We're definitely going to the large cap space in an ETF, Vanguard,
Okay.
and shifting our small and mid. We're just rearranging within those managers, believing if we're going to pay for any kind of active management in that
You're preaching
space.
it converted on this. The question is, I'm just curious, really not, you don't have a calculator in front of you, so I apologize, but if we have 92 million I assume you're referring to domestic equity, right? So if we have 92 million, do you know approximately how much of that is large cap and how much would be still with active managers?
That was one of our parts of our strategy. We're actually have been and will continue to be overweight the mid and small cap space.
Okay.
which is not unlike most pension funds. So the split, we only vary, I think it's we have a 5% overweight to mid-cap and a 5% overweight to small cap in comparison to the index. That I do know. And actually, if you can get our last minutes from January, it actually has, it was put together by Callan, what the actual dollar amounts are, because they did it in frame of reference, realizing that our equity dollar amount's going to go down when we put money into the private equity. So it's all like what it will look like.
For what it's worth, I think it's a great idea. So I congratulate you there. Your lower expenses are going to mean higher returns.
Save us $300,000 a year in expenses.
Yeah. And the only comment I have, and I'm a broken record on this, and where I disagree just a little bit with Mr. Flynn, would be that, I don't know why the pension fund, the common wisdom is that fixed income is somehow or another less volatile than equities. We know that's not necessarily true, particularly now with rates where they are, right? You could easily have a reversal like 94 and theoretically see big fixed income losses.
Yep.
So I don't know why you wouldn't pick a third manager in fixed income and get each of those guys below 10%.
Yeah.
Because if something were to happen, and we had big problems with Dwight back, Brian, before you were on the board.
You actually do have a third manager here, or maybe that's not.
Well, they got out of it.
GSAM's going. GSAM's going away.
Well, we had some real problems with Dwight that we got lucky that didn't turn out to be big problems.
Yeah, I could see it.
And so it's just my 2 cents is that I think it's a freebie to pick a third fixed income manager. In fact, I'd use an index personally, and get them all under 10%. I just don't see any reason why you'd want to have to explain something later on that isn't necessary. But otherwise, I think the mix is a lot better. I give you credit for that.
I don't think there's a whole lot of explanations. I mean, when you look at what happened with Dwight, it wasn't because of mismanagement. It was because they were an active manager. They were overweight mortgages. So, I mean, that's why they underperformed when they did. So,
Well,
I mean,
it was a little more
so when you,
Okay.
no, I mean, so when you sit there, you pick your managers, are you either going to, if you're going to do an index, yeah, I don't believe, or even some sort of a core fund which doesn't appear to provide you much alpha, then you should have it in an index. We actually, Montgomery, we talked about duration at the last meeting. Montgomery's actually set up close to the index duration, and Sykes is below it, which is when we brought up the fact that people shouldn't be shocked if we see interest rates go up during this year, that we're going to have, depending on how much rates go up, we could basically look at 5% of loss for every 100 basis points we see go up in like the 10-year. So, but we have questions out to them about, we do know that Montgomery, for example, uses floating rate fixed income right now to try and take the edge off of their duration. So, I mean, that's why you're paying for a manager.
Okay, let me actually express it differently then. I would say, this is again just an opinion and a suggestion, is that if for some reason you guys don't want to do what I recommended, then you should amend the investment guideline to say fixed income funds are exempt from the 10% guideline.
That's why I'm pretty sure it's not a 10%. That's why, I mean, we're not in violation of the IPS, so it's not
Not accusing you of
10%.
that.
Well, I know, that's why I said that I don't think it's 10%, because we'd be in violation there.
Or maybe it was custom that we thought it should be 10%. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else on this? Mr. Walsh? I'm sorry, and then I'll get you, Mr.
Good evening, Brian. Just a couple of just introductory questions. On where it says other and it says town employees and fire and police, I know it's a small amount. What is that?
Yeah, it's funny, we talked about that last meeting too. Evidently, transition account, first of all, deals with monies that are flowing from settlements, for lack of a better word. And then the other actually, and together, other and transition should equate to about 2%, because that is our sort of target cash for liquidity.
Okay. Other questions, the real estate investments, are those all REIT funds?
One is a equity REIT, and the which is TA Realty and Principal Opportunities Fund is actually just a debt type investment fund, so it's not a REIT.
Have you guys figured out what the recent retirements in the fire department and all that's going on, and with the guys getting the extra funds towards the end, has done to what's going to be the ARC contribution, and what effect, and also what the total cost of that has been to the town? Have you worked on that with Callan at all?
Well, Callan wouldn't have any input because they're, I mean, I guess if we had their actuaries, I mean, we deal with the investment manager guys. Remind me again, Mr. Mayor, our actuarial firm is Hooker and Holcomb. So that, and I have noted some of the press. I haven't gotten into the details. I sort of know some things that have occurred. I do know that it's not a simple Excel spreadsheet calculation, which I think may be utilized currently. It's probably will be significant because the fact is that if these pensions are immediate, those are immediate today dollars out.
Yep.
So it's the other thing that it's not modeled within our. I mean, we just got done our experience review where we weren't having a lot of people retire, and it appears that that's going to be a gross underestimation. So what that'll mean is we'll see more current dollars coming out, which that will make the ARC contribution immediately go up because your modeling is you're going to have a direct dollar mismatch right away. And I don't, it's not, the math isn't super hard, but it's several different equations. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it's an actuarial type of a question. And I don't know that it's necessarily worth paying for right away. I mean, we'll see very shortly what our contributions are going to change.
Will those ARC contribution calculations are they coming up, so we'll know what it is based on the numbers?
They usually are, because what I know the one big piece everybody watches is this return, because part of it's keyed off of whether or not you hit your target return. Right. As far as dollar, and the rest of the stuff is off the dollar amount that's present in the pension, because they'll do an actual funding, like where you are as a percentage funding.
And we got a preliminary one for next year done just a couple of months ago that we shared, that we discussed in November. But obviously that was before all the new information came in and all that kind of stuff. Mr.
Well, and I don't know when those pensions start either. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right.
But I mean, there's no dollars have left yet, I don't think.
Well,
They've
some
already
of them
left.
started immediately.
But
They
they're-
already retired, so I'd imagine that's happening. But when are we going to hear from the actuaries again in terms of our budget process and cycle? Have you?
A couple of questions. I'm not sure exactly when the next scheduled evaluation would be, but I have, of course, been in discussion with the actuaries regarding the fire and pension plan situation. The calculation, as Mr. May indicates, it has many moving variables. You can calculate a maximum present value of the people who've retired, and that number is about $494,000. But that would be a maximum number because that number is measured against so many unknowns. What would these people have done if they hadn't taken those provisional retirements at that time? What if they'd worked 3 more years, the pension plan would have been the same. The pension payments would have been the same. So there's an incredible number of, so you can create a maximum. Some of them may have been promoted. You have no idea. So you can create a max, but you cannot create a certain number.
Sure. Well, you can't. It's actuarial math. You can't create a certain number, period, because it's all based on assumptions.
Yeah,
But on what people are going to do in the future.
correct.
That being said, when's the next calculation going to be done, and when are we going to see the actuaries before us so we can discuss it? Do we know?
Well, you're talking about the normal annual calculation
Yeah.
or the annual, then?
Yeah.
That-
We usually see them
We do
right
that
before the budget process.
that happens every year, I think, that they come here for
That's
the
right.
budget process.
That's right.
Right.
So when are they coming in?
It's not scheduled. I mean, it may be scheduled, but I'm not aware if it is. I don't know
Right.
if it's in the budget
That's
schedule or
really
not.
what I was asking. Can we get them to come in, and let's just make sure, to the extent they already haven't done the calculation, that they have this information, which it sounds like they probably do, because you provided it for
Correct.
them,
Correct.
so that that's factored into the calculation. Just so that we know, for budgetary purposes, what number we should be putting aside for the budget, like we do every year.
Yeah, they at this point have indicated they don't think there'd be any changes to their assumptions, so the ARC would be negatively changed. I mean, obviously, there's more money out, but it's, yeah. But anyway, I'll let them discuss it.
I
Yeah.
think on it,
Follow
You know,
up
back-
on Mr. Mayor on
Yeah, please.
the back of the envelope.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I didn't maybe I misunderstood one of your things when you were talking about there being so many variables. I thought you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some of these guys might have decided to stay if they didn't get this, and there's a possibility, I guess, of that. But all of them, and what the chief said, was that they weren't staying, that this was all sudden stuff. They needed to retire. They chose to retire when they chose to retire. So it wasn't whether they were going to stay on or not. It's the fact that they...
I have, Mr. Walsh, I have no idea what they may or may not have done. It's
So we
just that
got to
there's
take them at their
variables.
word. We got to
Pardon?
we got to kind of take them at their word that they were going to retire when they were going to retire, because they decided that they didn't want to work for the town anymore. So that variable seems to be known, because they retired. They put papers in. I guess
They retired based upon the current situation.
they retired
They made
because
it,
they got a raise.
they made a decision to retire when they made the decision to retire. If certain things hadn't transpired, they may have made different decisions. I have no idea.
Well, that's not kind of what was in the paper and what the chief was saying, because he said that they just decided to retire when they decided to retire. So it doesn't seem as though, unless the reason they were retiring was, oh, well, let me get the bump, and then I'll immediately retire, because then that makes it seem a lot worse, actually. But the hearings that I saw seemed to suggest that, the people retired when they wanted to retire. They just happened to have gotten a raise sometimes 10 days or days before.
Yeah, I cannot address what they were thinking.
Yeah, so I don't think if we try to figure out what the cost is, that's really an unknown variable. I think it's definitely more definitive and an easier calculation if you take them at their word, that they wanted to retire on
I
the
have
date
not
that they
talked to
wanted to
any,
retire.
I have not talked to any of the people who retired.
Well, I don't think you have to. They're the ones who submitted the retirement papers. I mean, you just have to take them at their word. So I would like to see some type of calculation based on the people that we know about to figure out what the costs are, and I'd be interested even having our actuary come in, and if there's a cost to do this, Brian, there would be an additional cost to do this calculation? Will they charge us for this, like by an hourly rate or something?
There always is.
There
Yes, that's how they make their living. I don't think it's really, they're not going to, I don't think it's that bad of a charge. I haven't seen their bills. But for this year, if they are in fact not going to change any of the experience study numbers, I would be willing to guess that you're not really going to see any change in your ARC. And matter of fact, if knock on Formica, if the markets continue this way, you're probably going to see less, because that, like I said, that the big driver is going to be the actual market return above that target. But if they don't change the fact that it was modeled X number of people are expected to retire every 5-year period, and that's what they bake in, and also that the salary levels the way they're baked in.
Right.
So those two things aren't adjusted, then I wouldn't expect there really to see any changes at all. Matter of fact, the market effect will probably override everything.
Which means that the numbers are not accurate.
Right, I think we
Right.
want to know.
No, that's why
Yeah.
it's, if we really have some concrete thing, we can go, I don't have those two booklets they provided, but you can actually see the assumptions that were put in about how many were supposed to retire over each rolling period. And
I'm not suggesting we spend thousands upon thousands of dollars
no, I
to
don't
do
think
that,
it would be that much.
but I think we do need a revised calculation to show what the impact is, so that we know for sure. Otherwise, we're making decisions on bad information.
First of all, I agree, generically. I
Yeah.
think what we're doing is, and this is a question as much as a statement for Mr. Mayor or Brian, is, I guess my first question is to either of you guys, I don't remember, the actuary, I missed that meeting when we actually got our last report.
We got the report, they did not attend.
Right. But that's
Mr.
a-
Tetra was kind enough at my request,
Right.
given the fact.
No, I
that-
understand.
Yeah. that
Well, my
we
question
needed
is,
a number.
is when do they make, in other words, the number that, we've pledged to fund the ARC, or in fact, last year we funded even higher. When does that number finally come to Fairfield? In other words, we have a budget hearing that goes throughout the months of March, like whatever it is, into April. So, Bob, is it, in other words, so we got a preliminary report, is that
No,
correct?
we have the number for this year.
A firm number? Correct. Okay, so the reason I'm asking is, so it sounds to me like all the Mr. Walsh is bringing up some very good points, but I think it's next year's problem, per se. In other words, I wouldn't, I mean, we know it's going to add a few dollars, and we're all gravely concerned about this fire issue, but I think to spend extra money
And that's the point.
would be a waste.
And I want to hear that from the actuaries.
Right, well, we will hear from, when do they come?
We'll
to us?
also note that the actuaries, it may have gotten lost, and it really wasn't for the pension board, but there was supposed to be an asset liability model done for you guys. I haven't seen that, so. It was during the
Maybe it's a penalty
transition,
for
transition
late.
to CFO and everything, but, and it would be nice for us to view that as a pension board, but it's probably not going to really impact the investment decisions. But for the questions that you guys had last time when we went over the experience study, that sounded like more what you guys wanted to see as far as what the obligations were going to be well out into the future.
I see Mr. Mayor taking notes on that.
And I think also, for what it's worth, Brian made the best point of all, which is that and we talked a lot about this during the last budget season, was that they made some changes that I thought were a little aggressive personally on the liability side, and one of them was a expectation. In fact, I remember sitting in the meeting, she said, this is an incredible department, nobody ever retires, and now all of a sudden it turns out that's not the case. So
Well, and I think these
all
are-
those things will flow through, but it'll probably be for next year's,
And I think that's what we want to make sure, and here's what I want to make sure.
yeah.
We did get a preliminary report, or an early report. Mr. Tetro and I and Mr. Mayor, and on behalf of this board as well as the Board of Selectmen, wanted to know what the obligation was going to be, and we wanted to get that number out there so that department heads would know the hill there was to climb. So we got that number. Subsequent to getting that number, some circumstances have changed. They may have an impact, a significant impact this year, they may not. I'd like to hear that from the actuary. We know it's going to have an impact. We know it'll definitely have an impact in a future year. I think what's important is, and I'm not asking for anything that's outside of the custom of our board, to have the actuaries come before us as part of the budget process and be able to ask them directly what those questions are.
Yeah, I'll make sure they're properly prepared, understanding the interests of the board.
Yeah, and it sounds like you already have, and I think that Brian's absolutely right. The assets and liability study that we spoke about some time ago would certainly be welcomed by our board and perhaps by his, even though, like he said, it's not going to change their investment decisions.
Brian, how often do we do experience studies? Because I know you said we just completed one.
4 to 5 years.
I believe it's every 3 years, not to exceed 5.
I think we waited on the last one.
I think we were right by that
Yeah,
5.
yeah.
If we see a drastic amount of retirements, do you think it would make sense for you to talk at your level about doing another one before that 3-year period comes up? So
I
that
think
we
it's-
properly can budget and for the next 3 years before we have to wait for that?
I think it's a little premature. I think we can get an easy answer by going back and asking, because I remember the conversation too, about we were modeling everybody retiring
Yep.
as soon as they were able to, and we actually had people many, many years, and the chief would be a real outlier, like, that didn't retire. So it was really our numbers were, they were aggressive the other way. I mean, we were putting too much money away, or whatever, that the percentage funding was off because of that. But I don't know if the new thing assumes that people stay 5 years past it. I don't know how but it was definitely feathered in based on, unfortunately, I think the previous 5 years. It's definitely a 5-year look back. I know that. And I think we do them every 3 years, not to exceed 5.
Yep.
So your thought would
So
be
we
to
could
wait?
ask, like, well, we could say how different is this, because the other thing is I'm not sure about the assumed salary level that's
Exactly.
baked in there either. Because obviously, I think
Before we
those are the two
decide,
things
we
that have
to
changed,
pressure
right?
test some of the, before we decide whether a full-blown experience, or you decide a full-blown experience study needs to be done, some of the new information and some recent experience should be pressure tested against what you're currently looking at, right? And then a decision made. Right?
That's all I
set?
got. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Stone? Mr. Bolito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Mr. Vahey, and this is from a layman's perspective, but when I look at the page 3, going down to the very bottom of the total fund, last 36 months, we're at 7.82%, which is obviously well within the ballpark. You look at the last 60 months, and I see 0.07%, which is obviously a real eye-opener. I'm assuming that some of that's because 2008's contained in that 60-month period, kind of the worst of the Great Recession. Is there any other factor that this board should be aware of to explain the discrepancy between the last 36 months and the last 60 months?
Madoff.
Madoff?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? It's the easiest answer you had all night? Yeah. All right. Seeing none, I'll go to the public real quick. Nothing, back to the board. Mr. Vahey, thank you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Have a good night. All right, we'll go to the Board of Education financial position versus the budget as of Q2 fiscal year 13. Mr. Dwyer is here, and I'm sure he can answer the nitty-gritty of any question that comes before us this evening.
Every number memorized.
But we do have, just in case he doesn't, we do have a rather good explanation that was put together by the administration. So, did anybody have any questions or follow-up items? Again, remember, the Board of Education will be before us during the budget process.
A couple.
Sure, Mr. Walsh, and let's make sure we have these for the record, just in case
In the
Mr.
overall,
Dwyer's memory fails him.
in the summary that was prepared by Doreen Munsell, she talks about the staffing being over for the current fiscal year that we're in by 4.65 FTEs. And I guess the increases that are there were primarily due to increased sections at the elementary and high school levels. Are those in your budget that you just approved, the board's budget that you approved, because it's now your budget, are those positions being maintained?
Next year's budget.
Yes. Are those being maintained in next year's budget from this, that extra 4.65 FTEs?
No positions are maintained. We use an enrollment projection as to how many students will be in K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in each of the schools that are provided by our consultant, and then we budget for those projections. And so next year's total elementary enrollment is about like within 1 or 2 students of this year's current enrollment. So it's not a question of maintaining. We do kind of a zero-based budgeting of how many teachers do we need based on the projection for next year. So I think that, hopefully that answers your question.
Sure. I'll take a look at your budget book. In regards to the part-time employment, is there a reason why it's at 60% as opposed to 50? Why it's 10% over so far for this year?
I'll have to plead my memory is not, no, I couldn't answer questions at that level of detail.
Okay. Do you know of any problem with printing? Because it seems that you're at 91.79% of your printing budget and it's under school expenses. Do you know what that's caused by?
No, again, that level of detail, I think Ms. Munsell would be better equipped to make sure that she gave you an accurate answer.
All right. Under support expenses, the security expenses seem to be about 23% over the 50% mark of where we are. Is that caused by the security improvements caused by the recent events in Newtown?
We have been spending money on security improvements, so we will overspend on that line. The board has agreed to defer installation of the new lockers at Fairfield Woods Middle School as a way of balancing that out. And when we end the school year, we'll do those budget adjustments to kind of zero those 2 line items out. There most certainly are line items that are overspent as a result of the costs associated with Superstorm Sandy, and as a result of the RTM's decision on Monday, we'll be able to bring those back in line, too.
And some of those will hopefully be being reimbursed by FEMA, correct?
And
But we just don't know the timing
That's part
of
of the equation, too, yes.
Okay. The rest of the questions that that we weren't able to get answered, I guess I'll go to Dr. Title and, or Doreen directly with those at this point in time.
Thank you.
And in their budget book, teaching staff looks like it's staying actual to budget, it's staying within one person. Does that sound right? One position?
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, we have growth at the high school as we projected we would, kind of staying the course at elementary school, so.
Okay. Any areas of the budget that are currently, or rather the year-to-date expenditures that are currently concerning the board other than the additional costs related to the security and the storm? Is there anything else that's?
We're comfortable that the budget will be in balance at the end of the year, now that the decision has been made on Osborne Hill and Superstorm Sandy.
Other than the expenses that are listed on these sheets, which are, I guess, would come off Munis, do you know of any potential problems where you know we're already going to be over, stuff that has not hit the books yet?
No. I mean, there will always be a little over on one line, a little under on another line, but there's nothing major out there that Ms. Bunsell, in her last report to us, has indicated that she's uncomfortable with. You know, those two items that relate to the Superstorm Sandy and to the PCBs at Osborne Hill created quite a bit of nervousness, but they seem to have been resolved at the moment, so the rest of the line items I think she's comfortable with, you know, in terms of balancing each other off.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Brown.
The excess cost. You really think I have a good memory, don't you? Go ahead.
This is just a question on if you've heard or how do you know? The excess cost reimbursement, you're pretty positive we'll get that full reimbursement as it states? That's for the pupil, that's for the PPS?
Excuse me, Mr. Brown, could you bring your microphone a little closer, please?
You're a low talker, Jim.
Okay, so I think I'd have to give the same general answer that I gave to Mr. Walsh, is that Ms. Munsell has not indicated that she projects that the excess cost reimbursement that we're going to get for this fiscal year is going to be substantially off the budget in a way that we can't balance it with something else.
When does she find out for sure?
Well, I think
February, right?
Mr.
Says in the report.
Yeah, that would be a question
That's when
Mr.
it
Flynn can add to Ms. Munsell's list. Okay.
That's when the state lets us know?
Ms. Munsell probably could clarify that. I wouldn't want to give you an answer that was,
I think they actually get the check in the February timeframe, as I recall, don't they?
She states in her report that the initial excess cost reimbursement, which is received in February, is based on anticipated costs filed with the Pupil Services in December.
Right, so they get a check, they get a reimbursement in February, as I recall.
But she also said that based on the second quarter indicates a negative balance of 2.3 million, but is currently expected to restore to a positive position. Is that your question? Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe next month.
Can ask that for the budget process. Yeah. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
thank you very much.
And we'll see you soon, I'm sure. All right. Line item 5, to review the town financial position versus budget as of the end of Q2, which is December 31st. Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being
Mr. Chair,
here.
Board, thank you very much. Before we begin with the numbers, I'd like to address one of the discussion items that came up at the last quarterly, which was the timing and dissemination of information. So the intent is, and we did half of it this quarter, was to send out the Munis material along with, and there's two other items that were new to you this quarter. You got the source of revenue, schedule of revenue by source, and you got a schedule of expenditures by object code. So ideally, these will be distributed to the board about the 15th of the month, which will allow board members to have some type of, some time, to review, and if there's any specific questions, then, if the meeting is 10 to 14 days later, there's time for you guys to read it, ask questions, for us to research and get more specific answers.
Mr. Mayor, before you go on, and I just want a clarification so that we don't ask some unnecessary questions in the future. Thank you for that, by the way. The budget, as it's represented on these schedules, is the full year budget, correct?
Correct.
And so we'll be comparing the full year budget till the year-to-date actual.
Correct, and the percent thereof.
So many of the comments are going to be the fact that there's a timing issue, right?
Right. This basically, the focus is what percent was it year-to-date last year at this time versus what percent is it year-to-date this year at this time.
Exactly. I just want to make
Like
sure, because I didn't
seasonality
want.
adjustment kind of thing.
Yep, thank you.
So anyway, so that, roughly speaking, you'll get, repeating myself, you get the munis report, which would be the revenue, the expenditures, and the WPCA, Waste Pollution Control Authority. You'll get those. You'll get the schedule of expenditure by object, and you'll get the schedule of revenue by source for your review to get back to us with questions. And then what we're doing is then we're looking at, obviously, this stuff to try to identify the accounts that are of interest to us because they are kind of out of line from a percentage basis. And then you have what we call the general fund accounts of interest. Then you have two sheets. You have a revenue sheet and an expenditure sheet. So you'll get those along with kind of an executive summary that schedules the significant known variances and any other items that I think might be of pertinent interest to the board. Now, in addition to that, the board had in the past identified specific funds, specific accounts that they were interested in. Likely, if there's any variability in those accounts, they will be picked up in this earlier process. However, we can continue, providing this or not. Maybe we might want to discuss that at some future time, but probably not tonight. Okay. With that said, I'll go into the numbers. Going to the schedule of significant known variances, the lead schedule. No, schedule of significant known variances. Should be the first page in the packet of this subset of this agenda item.
We don't get them in a specific order, so you have to point it out to us.
It's got kind of a formal scheduled title, Board of Finance Quarterly Review for quarter ended December 31, 2012. Executive Summary, January 30th, 2013. It's got a Roman numeral 1 and a Roman numeral 2.
Bob, the schedule that you're referring to when you use that term before, you're talking about the name of your file at the bottom right-hand corner, correct?
No, I'm talking about the top.
Okay. The significant known variances? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He's talking about this one.
Yeah, that looks like it from here.
Okay. Yeah.
It's was not the section, it wasn't the very first document.
No, it wasn't. This is the quarterly review. It's this one.
Was this what was sent out yesterday? Two documents sent out yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's, okay.
Yes.
If someone's missing it, it was the one that was one of the two documents sent out yesterday.
Yeah. Bottom half was sent out earlier, the top half didn't make it out till yesterday. And I apologize for that.
Okay, so go ahead. Mr.
All right,
Mayor.
so what this item, this page is meant to be a succinct listing of things that we know. These are certainties, and they're significant. Most of them have been discussed at one time or another. On the Roman numeral 1, we have the premium from the bond sale. We have the Video Competition Trust, which is a state grant. 100% of those revenues have been received, and it's 130,000 more than what was anticipated. Same with the municipal revenue share. 100% of those revenues have been received. 360,000 have been received, greater than what was budgeted. Pilot program, 100% of the revenue has been received. The amount received is $356,000 more than was budgeted. So we have a total positive variances of about $3.7 million. And then on the negative side, we have I really should have in bold and caps after Storm Sandy estimate. But we're looking at approximately $1.2 million. The total out-of-pocket expenditures was about $3.2 million, $3.4 million. $1.2 million probably not reimbursable, estimated. And then we have the reserve for other anticipated expenditures, which is primarily an item that this board discussed in executive session a couple of months ago, several months ago, giving us a net positive variance about $1.2 million. The bottom half shows the change in the Internal Service Fund, the fund balance, and then in your documentation was included the statement of net assets from the CAFR, I'm sorry, which just to support that number, our year-end number, June 30, 12, is $4,630,000. I know during the budget season last year, it was anticipated that number was, but probably was going to be $3.5 million, and then I think then during the budget process, you got some negative experience in the Board of Ed account. That's why the town put in the $2 million supplemental contribution to try to improve that number. Based upon reviewing health care only, have not calculated reserves for workers' comp, the legal liability accounts, the general liability accounts, the liabilities, though the cash flow has been light on that, the liabilities per attorneys seem to be consistent with what's in budget, but just so based solely on the the revised estimate for the year ended June 30, 2012, looks like we can have an unfavorable variance of about $1.6 million. So the estimated improvement in fund balance at this point, even though it was intended to be $1 million, possibly is looking like about $350,000. And then the last item, the B item, is just to keep that in our memory banks, that we do have the 6-day accounting rule adjustment that we talked about, maybe addressing at some point.
Bob, because I don't. We approved that one for this year?
No, we did not approve that. We
Right.
talked about keeping track, keeping it on our agenda and understanding it to see if we ever, depending on
Right,
how the numbers
exactly.
come out. We currently record in our books and records tax revenue from the period September 1
Yep.
through August 31 versus July 1 through June 30.
Yep.
And to make that to switch to the July 1 to June 30 timeline would cost that specific year approximately $1.1 million. That was the number that would have been used had we made that change last year.
Anybody have a question on that item? Because I want to go back to the Internal Service Fund if people are okay with that. So last year we put in, and Mr. Tetra reminded me as well, we put in a lot more money into the Internal Service Fund, $2 million, with the hopes that that would help us start to correct the negative balance in that fund, correct? this year, we've all been following the fact that the Board of Education has had a very difficult year on the medical insurance side of the house. I think the town, at least last report I had heard, had done it significantly better than they thought they were going to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to review the timing. I think everybody here was part of it, but we basically had put in a $1 million initial plan contribution.
Yep.
During the budget process. As we got updates, it looked like that $1 million was going to get chewed up by less than positive experience. So we added in another $1 million during that. So we had a $2 million total number coming in.
Yep. And we didn't get nearly the bang for our buck that we were hoping. So although we've got a slight improvement in the fund balance, it's not what we had hoped last year.
Correct. We had hoped that would bring it down. The goal was to bring it down $1 million from where it was, and we did not achieve that because of the experience.
Now, to be clear, based on something that you said, Mr. Mayor, the only thing that's really been rolled forward here for new information is on the medical side, right?
Have not done a thorough analysis, and have not recalculated the workers' comp accrual. There's, however, no information. The cash flow has been light on that, but the reserve will probably be similar.
Similar to
Prior. Yeah. I
That's
mean,
gonna be
I'm
updated
hoping for
for-
some, yeah, I mean, we still have a couple of cases out there, do you remember, that we,
Yeah, right. But are you gonna have that updated information so that we'll have more current total fund information when we're making our budget decision? Because this has been a pain point for us.
we'll have that. We'll have what we can have.
And these numbers for the internal service fund, at least, let's just take the Board of Education. Those numbers were based on the end of November?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Mayor on that.
That was through December.
The numbers in the Board of Ed budget are through November. The numbers in my presentation, our presentation, are through December.
Okay. Did the numbers for the Board of Education improve in December versus through November?
Yes, they did.
How much of an improvement has that been from November to December?
For this year, about, hold on a second.
There's two schedules you can.
About $1 million.
About $1 million to the good?
Yes, sir.
So the Board of Ed budget, if they adopted it, they only cut $300-something thousand last night, possibly, and I guess we can track it month to month until we all get the budget, might be $1 million to the better, which would lead one to believe that there's a possibility, depending on what experience happens over the next couple of months, that we may be able to cut $1 million from their budget.
I anticipate, if you think about it, the year starts July 1.
Yeah.
So basically, July, August, September, October, November is 5 months.
Yep.
By the time this board votes on the final budget, I'm hoping that we'll have the information through March.
Okay.
So you'll have an additional 4 months, or almost double the information.
So we can keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully
sir.
that stays true, and maybe we can just knock $1 million right off just because of that.
Right, and hope that
Great.
the town also stays true, which is like
Ti-
flat with its
Time out,
budget.
though. I have a fundamental issue with that, which I think is the problem we have with this account in total. By doing it by month, we expose ourselves greatly to a couple of bad months' experience. The biggest problem with this fund is it's in a negative position because that's what's been done with it, is they basically took the most recent experience, just assumed it was going to continue, and then posted their funding of it based on that. And the problem with that is there's not enough cushion, lack of a better word, in that fund balance to absorb when you're wrong or when you're right. So for example, if this fund balance was sitting at a higher percentage of funding, 10, 20, 30%, whatever it is, you could play the odds on the month-by-month game. But all of a sudden, you have a good month of December, January, February, you lower your increase into that fund, you have a horrible March, April, May, and you set yourself up for a significant issue with this fund in the subsequent year. That's the problem with it, because it's not, the trend in this instance isn't, especially the short-term trend isn't necessarily your friend, because it's based on people's health events.
How do we arrive at some kind
Well,
of normalized rate?
If I may, you're absolutely correct, but a couple of things of note. One, well, last year, had the board used the latest information, you would have put more money in. It can go both ways.
That's exactly
It can go
right.
both ways. That's first. Secondly, when these numbers are calculated, it's not just based upon the last 2-3 months. Basically, you're looking at it, the 12-month stream. So
Right.
basically, you end up having the most recent 12 months with most recent information, but it's never going to be perfect.
And the problem is, when you do it like that with such a small, basically your fund balance is in a negative position, all you have to do is be wrong.
Right.
That it's not so much if you were to use a 12-month trend, okay, it's probably the best available information, as you said, but that assumes there's something there to cushion you up or down. The problem is, we don't have the something there.
That's correct. In fact, well, last year, I think the Board of Ed in the budget, the approved budget, used a trend rate that was 3% below the national trend rate based upon,
Their own experience.
their own experience, which isn't necessarily, because we all know about the regression to the mean, and B, their part of the fund balance, of the total internal service fund balance, was at a 2 times IBNR versus a single time IBNR.
And they were willing to take that risk
That's
because
risk.
they had such a higher
Right.
fund balance.
Right.
And when you have a high fund balance, you can take that risk.
Right, and that 2
We don't
times.
have that
Right.
globally.
And that 2 times has been eliminated. It's,
Exactly.
Right.
It's now what, one?
well, it's below 1 time. At the end of this year, it'll be below 1. Part of their request for funds is to make it back up to 1, and their, and the reserve they're using this year is the national trend.
Right. So they're trying, and aren't our insurance experts saying we want to be at about 1.5 IBNR? Isn't that, do I remember that correctly? Is it 1 to 1.5?
I believe
globally?
that's what I remember, but I believe that may not be the advice that the Board of Ed was given this year.
Right,
So I think you may want to, again, follow up with them in terms of what the actuary
right,
recommended to them.
right. But I guess what I'm saying is, on the town side, we were negative, right? The Board of Ed was 2 times positive. In 1 year, they went from 2 times positive to almost negative. Right? We, luckily, on the town side, I say we, I know globally we're all we, but on the town side, it was negative, and because of 1 good year, came back to the positive side.
Actually, I think we've had probably a couple good years. I think we
Couple
were
good years.
more negative than we were to start the year,
Right.
2 years ago.
But we also
picked
put
that
in
up.
the supplemental.
Well, we put that into the general liability side, the workers' comp number, not so much the, we did 2 years ago, put an additional contribution into the town insurance side, in that range.
Right.
Forgive me for not remembering the exact number, in that
The problem
range.
is, we don't have that band, we don't have a margin for error here.
Correct. And which is why you and I went before the Board of Ed last spring.
Right. It's globally, the margin of error isn't there. So if you bet the farm on better experience because of a 3-month, the 3-month trend getting better, affecting the 12-month trend, you really expose the whole fund.
Yeah.
That's essentially what happened.
And that, I think that is the point you and I tried to explain to everybody so we could get everybody on the same page with that.
Right.
We've obviously taken steps to improve our general liability balance, as we did this, I keep saying this past year, but in the current year.
Right.
We have funded per the recommendations of our insurance consultants, the town insurance fund, and that has been beneficial the last 2 years,
Right.
if not the last 3.
Right.
And I believe the Board of Ed is following their recommendations this year in terms of what they're doing, so hopefully that will help out also. And just to work on the timing, I think it's been our historic practice to get an update at the end of February, so that you have that for both the Board of Selectmen as well as the Board of Finance votes at the end of March, first week in April. So it's the data through February that you'll have to evaluate at that point.
Okay. Any other questions, or?
It's one
Yeah.
question, but it may not be, if we can't answer it here, Mr. Mayor, then, well, I can wait until the insurance advisors come. But why do we even, I may have asked this question last year, so remind me if I did, Tom, or anybody. We have reasonable-sized group of workers, right? Why are we even interested in a 6 months or 3 months or 1 year, even 2 year experience of our group, which can, by definition, can have a couple of outliers that could throw the numbers off? Why aren't we just using some national experience numbers?
We are on the town side, and I think the Board of Ed just went back to that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. I mean, basically, our populations are too small to calculate trend off of. You need a larger population to calculate trend. You need like 10 to 15,000.
We are, okay, so what I'm asking is...
You need like 10 to 15,000 lives for a true trend calculation.
So what you're saying is, what I'm asking is what we're doing.
Well, may I understand your question? Basically, we use our experience and then we apply the national trend to it as part of the calculation.
Past experience.
It's
apply
a
the
combination of both.
But why are we even doing that, is the question?
What- I don't
Why do
know.
we care about our experience at all?
Because that's what,
No,
because it's
I
what's
prefaced it
trending.
by saying
Because it's a demographic information that helps calculate what our...
I mean, no, it's just, we have a population that has an experience. Otherwise, you would use a national average for that age-sex population. That's called age-sex rating, and you don't want to go there because it's just, actuarially, from a healthcare perspective, it would not give you the right answer.
Okay.
That's how small groups are calculated.
Okay. If this is one of those answers, I'll just have to accept that's the way it's done. I guess...
No, that's not, no, don't accept that that's the way it's done. Accept that that is the smart, correct way to do it.
I think we'll have to agree to disagree on this one and leave it at that, folks.
Yeah, okay. It's not really a disagreement, just for what it's worth. I'm just trying to understand how it's done, that's all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. We're still on internal service fund. I'm going to ask this question. I ask it every year, but I'm going to ask it again because things change. Given the uncertainty in trying to plan for funding the internal service fund because we're self-insured, given the pressure it causes on our credit rating, given the fact that it causes a lot of agita and a lot of uncertainty in terms of our budget planning, have we looked at recently whether it's still financially in our best interest to be a self-insured town?
We currently are going out with an RFP to do just that.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Mr. Mayor, had something to say?
You save about, you don't save money when you're fully insured.
No, I understand that, but what
Because
you do gain is cost certainty.
What you gain is cost certainty.
Right.
And the extra cost is probably 10%.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, so any other questions on this particular item, the internal service fund specifically? Mr. Walsh, please.
Yeah, I just have a general question. This is a new schedule, correct? Have we been getting this before?
I produced something, we produced something like this last quarter as well, but it didn't, I think it just had the top half, it didn't have other items. And I wouldn't look at the internal service fund after just one quarter. I'd want to give it 6 months to have some perspective of experience.
Okay, I guess the question I have is, what lines do you consider out-of-line items? If out-of-line items, do they make it onto this document or no?
The top half is all general fund items.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom half is 2 items. The internal service fund is the internal service fund, not the general fund. And then the 60-day rule would be an impact on the general fund if the board ever determined to make that change.
So if you knew of something that was really significant on revenues or expenses, is it not going to make it up to Section 1, or is it going to make it there?
Yeah, if I know, if I have a degree of confidence
Yep.
that it looks like that's what it is, then it goes on Roman number 1.
Right.
The next document, or the other document, the general fund accounts of interest, has the listing of accounts
Yep.
that are different, but I'm not ready to say, you know, like, well, I know we're going to save a ton of money on it, or it's going to cost us a ton of money. What's really interesting, if you go to the items, the schedule of expenditure by object, which is the very busy sheet.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's 2 pages.
Yep.
If you go to the very bottom line, the year-to-date percent, total expenditures as a percent of budget is, I mean, this just goes to show you kind of some of the problems, shows you 2 things. It shows you that we're in line with last year, but it shows you the inconsistencies, if you will, with our encumbrances activity, and because obviously that should be, you know, we should be spending near 50%. And I don't understand
Is
the
that
full.
based on the timing of these expenditures?
I have not fully developed the best way to evaluate and to have drilled down into all these accounts
Mhm.
to figure out, you know, but what we did was use this, though, as a starting point to come to the list of the general accounts of interest, where we then looked at more closely.
Mhm. Because I like this executive summary. It's just, the question I guess I have is, at what point do you, is it based on a percentage that something's a variance off of? Or is it you just flying by the seat of your pants on
No,
it?
these are not flying by, these are certainties. These are certainties.
No, it means,
No, I'm not
how
asking.
does it get
Oh.
on this
How does it
schedule?
get onto this executive summary?
Certainties.
So that I know
Things that I
you
think are
it's a
certain.
problem.
These are items that I am certain are going to be issues.
I guess the question then is there a way to put another part of the schedule where you believe that on these other variances, you're projecting now, after halfway through the year, that we're not going to be hitting some of these targets, and I can start looking at that in an executive summary to know, yeah, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a positive, actually?
You can look at the general fund of interest accounts if you want to switch to that document.
I guess I'm looking for more. Maybe I'm not
Do
explaining
you
myself.
want to switch to the general fund accounts of interest?
Well, I guess I'm looking, is there a way to get to the general accounts list and figure out whether there's some areas of revenue that might be
Those are
way
on the
off?
general accounts of
Yeah.
interest
Is there a way
schedule.
to have another section on the executive summary so that I can look at the executive summary and know either revenue is going to be up or down, and
It might
expenditures
be,
are going to
it
be up or
might be
down?
illuminating if we go to the document and talk about it.
Okay, then I'll circle back. So why don't we go in your order, and
Thank you.
just take us there, and then I'll circle back.
Okay, does everyone have the document, general fund accounts of interest, year-to-date, December 31? Okay, I think the first item, actually, Mr. Walsh, addresses, you know, what you're trying to talk about. This year, as of December 31, the town has collected 103% of its budgeted prior year levy tax receipt. Last year, at this time, that percentage was 58.3%. So I think I can say with a degree of certainty that we're going to have a positive variance in that line item. But I cannot tell you if that positive variance is going to be $100,000, $500,000, and if you have a magical way to figure that out, I'd be most interested.
Well, I guess I'm looking at you as the fiscal officer to tell me to do that magic, to at least come up with, meeting with the department heads and figuring out why we're so far over.
I remember last year, Mr.
To
Walsh,
giving us
when
an estimate.
when you got
will
quite...
you just let me finish the
I'm
question,
sorry,
please?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Will you, I guess, is there a way to talk to department heads and try to come up with a reasonable estimate and call it such as if you think we're going to be over or under, and we're going to have to know that that can change. And I'm not asking you that for every single account, but if you think something's well over, it might be handy on an executive summary to see other possible areas of interest where expenses are plus or minus, whether, and either highlight them on this general fund of accounts of interest, but on some things that might have more certainty, or areas that we should worry about.
I remember last year, Mr. Walsh, when you were quite upset that you were told at one meeting that the estimated variance for the year was approximately $500,000. You made a vote on that information. You were told about a week or so later that that 500,000 variance now looked like $1.5 million variance. The final variance ended up being 3.5 million. Basically, we don't want to put out information that is guesswork.
But we knew a lot more information then. I remember what you're talking about, and you're talking about the, what we thought was going to be the surplus, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And much of that information was known. It wasn't, it just didn't, a couple of weeks later, it wasn't known. You know, it was not like, oh, wow, we just found $3 million of extra money. So
I'm
the
not
question is,
certain that's correct.
Hey, guys, I think the point here is this. Let's go with this. First of all, the executive summary that you put together, right, here, these are known variances that you know we're going to have for the remainder of the year.
Pretty certain about, obviously, Storm Sandy is a pure estimate.
And you've said that.
Right.
You've said that.
Right.
Look, big black marker I wrote.
Right.
Okay.
And the
I get it.
reserve for other anticipated expense, I mean, there's obviously some estimating there as well.
So what you choose to put on the executive summary are items that, or events that happened that impacted amounts that you pretty much know. Or in Sandy, you might not know exactly, but you know with some degree of certainty that you're making an estimate on.
Correct.
Right? In here, in the general fund accounts of both revenue and expense, these are items, these are significant variances, right? They're really not accounts of interest. They're general fund significant variances as they stand today. They may or may not continue, right?
Correct. And some of them, like, for example, some of them we know, like all the ones with the comment item 3,
Yeah.
you know, we know we're pretty sure they're just timing issues.
Now,
But the you know, and we know with respect to the prior year's levy that there's probably some impact on that of the tax sale.
all right, so I think
But that's
this
not totally
this should be
quantifiable.
basically significant variances, significant known variances. This should be significant to-date variances, right, subject to change. I think what would help is, and I can completely understand the point of saying, hey, I don't want to put an amount in there. I get it. But I think what would help would be, we were in one place where we had more verbiage as opposed to less. Now we have very little verbiage down at the bottom. The format's good, but it just says basically tax sale. It doesn't say tax sale, so we're not going to catch up for the year. You know what I'm saying? Reflects economic activity. Well, what does that mean? We've had more, or is that rates, you know, volume, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, you could go to the building permits department, you say, you know, it's to again, to address one of Mr. Walsh's comments,
Right.
you go to departments, you do. You go there and you say, well, what do you think? Is this going to keep going?
And just
And
a
they say,
little-
I don't know. And
Right, and just a little bit of
Right.
that, saying, hey, we got lucky here, timing of receipts, but do we have a problem, you know?
Right.
Like, number 4 is actually pretty good. Timing of receipts, we expect 2 more installments, right?
Correct.
That kind of gives you a flavor. This, we almost went from too much verbiage to too little verbiage, where it's kind of like, big deal. Go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering, can we request a column that just says variance through December 31st, so we can see what goes up and down? Because it's not easy to tell which is we got more and which one we got
I
less.
see what you're saying, right.
So if we could have just one column that
Well, we
has
don't, I'm sorry.
just like the variance in a number, you have the variance in a percentage. Just one more column.
She's asking for the
Yeah.
dollar differential, not just the percent differential.
Yeah, I mean, we don't budget by month. We
don't
only
think-
budget by, I know, but I'm saying, we don't budget by month.
We're well
So,
aware.
so what you would have there is simply
Year to date.
your year-to-date, you'd have half your budget versus whatever had been expended. So your variance would, I assume what you're asking for is half the budget, if this is December 31, half the budget versus whatever we had expended. And that's not necessarily meaningful if you have an account where you spend all the money in June. You basically have zero versus, versus half of the budget,
Right, but
or if all your revenue came in June.
the reports we used to get that had more columns, the thick ones, that would show what was appropriated and what was, you could see at a glance, like, the amount that we were over or under.
Yeah, but that is in your package.
Yeah, but putting them on, adding a column on here that says dollar differential is not a big deal.
No. I'm just explaining why in some cases it.
Right, because
Right,
the
it won't
percentage is
necessarily-
Right.
meaningful because
Right.
it's not, because you
Right.
got to look versus prior year,
Right.
because that's your variance.
Right. And we did not subtract the other, because
Right.
you have this document in your package also.
Could you expand the verbiage down?
Yes,
below?
most certainly.
Okay, that'd be great. The other thing is, from my own perspective, on the expenditure side, where appropriate, can you put in the departments? This might just be a formatting thing. In other words, there's overtime vacancy payroll, overtime training relief, overtime business other, overtime.
I caught that actually this morning.
Yeah,
The first two are police, the next three are fire.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. No, I just couldn't,
Yeah, no, that's, I'm sorry about that, but you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. It's kind of like, okay.
yeah, I was trying to figure it out, right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You're right on that one.
What other questions do we have on this? Do you have specific questions on line items? Are the overtimes, are those mostly related to Sandy?
Yes,
Or
sir.
are those other items?
Mostly Sandy.
Please, go right ahead, Mr. Walsh.
I took some of the comments that you had, Bob, and subtracted those amounts out for Sandy. So, for example, if you take the first overtime earnings, expenditure line 51050, and if you deduct out the 140 and 140,000 for police, $175,000 for public works overtime, that's $315,000. And you deduct that from the expenditures to date, which is $1,014,042, the number gets down to $699,042, which is still 72% of the total amount of total budgeted overtime on that line item. What's the reason for why that would be over by 22%? Taking Sandy totally out of the picture.
But if you look, however, the prior year percentage was 70% at this time for overtime earnings, and 90.4% for overtime placement, 74% for overtime business other.
Is there a reason, though, why, I don't know if there's a reason why we use more of it during the summertime, or why in the first half we're using a significantly greater proportion of that
Well,
budget?
Yeah, overtime earnings, the general overtime earnings account, I assume, is mostly vacation coverage kind of activity, which may very well be summer activity. Overtime replacement is driven strictly by vacancies.
Okay.
So when they have vacancies, that's going to, and overtime business, I mean, that's a variety of activities, going to union meetings and seminars and education and training and such as that.
So, other than the Sandy overtime, your review of this is that we're not going to have a problem that you know of at this point in time, as we sit here tonight?
Correct.
Okay.
And I forgot to mention, Ms. Gardner apologizes for not attending today. It's the first quarterly session she's missed in the history of her tenure with the town, but she had a very important family activity tonight.
Wow. Perfect attendance goes right out the window. In unemployment compensation, we seem to be extremely low there, especially compared to what we were this time last year. Is that just based on experience levels, and keep our fingers crossed that continues?
Yeah, the school board had significant layoffs
Yep.
2 years ago.
Yep.
That fed into the expenditure last year. Plus, I believe when the federal government increased it to 99 weeks, I think the feds, the town went off the hook at the end of the normal 26 weeks or whatever, but then went back on the hook for the last 15 weeks, I think. I'm not, but in that 99-week extension, I think, is expired.
And both the maintenance, improvement of roads, and the capital asphalt paving is clearly ahead of schedule because they try to do most of the work from July 1st through when the asphalt plants are closing down?
Yeah, and the maintenance and improvement is behind last year's because they try to do most of this in the summer and fall, and less in the winter and spring. So they were delayed because of Storm Sandy. There was work they would have, and other. And the heart and hypertension, we just have not had the claims activity. We've also been light on the actual general liability claims, but in discussing the various issues with the attorneys, I'm not confident, but there's some hope there.
And you think there might be some hope on the heart and hypertension side as well?
Yes.
Good. Any other questions, comments, concerns? You all set? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope,
I'm sorry.
I'm all set.
Mr. Brown?
Just on heart and hypertension. Can a retiree come back and claim heart and hypertension? Or when can you claim heart and hypertension? Do you have to be an employee, or can you be a retiree?
I have no idea.
Find out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for non-public safety, you have to be an employee, but for public safety, there are special rules, and I'm just not, I would only be guessing and speculating if I were to answer that question.
Okay. So we could find out. All right.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is to follow up, to review follow-up request documents. One thing on here, Mrs. Albin, who was doing her homework, even though she wasn't going to be here, brought to my attention was there was a document that said, I do not believe that it would be right to do this or something. But yet it wasn't signed. Or it didn't say who the I was. It was. Yeah.
The excess paid? Refunding of excess taxes paid?
Yeah, so her question was very simple. Who's I?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't even notice that was at the top of that page. But that is our beloved tax collector who said that. I don't know how this ended up on that page.
So, yeah.
Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry, I was thinking this was a different page. Yes, this is, I'm sorry, my apologies. I was thinking this was something else. Yes, this is Cinda's document. She, if you remember, Mr. Brown, or no, I think it was Mr. Walsh, had the specific question, can we list these on? And when we drafted up the response was to address the refunding, and then in my final review of the response, I realized we had not addressed that specific issue, so I asked Cinda what she thought, and this was her response to that question. I'm sorry, I got this document confused with a different document for a second there. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, it's on, it's funny enough, I can't find it right now, but it was, I did see it after she pointed it out to me. After Catherine pointed it out to me. Okay, why don't we go through the follow-up items? Who wants to walk us through those? Briefly.
Secretary Mr. Brown should probably
I don't know that he was involved in putting this together, so why don't we?
I guess I'm not sure how much detail you want on this first item. Basically, though, I can say that and I haven't read this since we did it 3 weeks ago, or maybe even longer. And I guess I don't know if anyone on the board has read it or have any specific questions. The short and sweet of this is, we went in, we evaluated, there were some process changes that definitely need to be made, and we identified those and are installing new policies and procedures, and this is an outline of those policies and procedures.
So these are the these are the proposed new policies or procedures for tax refunds,
Correct.
for refunding excess taxes paid. Okay.
And I guess, I think it is the intent of the tax collector's office to implement these as is. Not I guess, I know.
Okay, anybody have any questions on this right
You know,
now?
one of the issues, if you remember, was the town was informally applying overages to future
Yeah,
and not properly identifying people, and we weren't properly tracking, and we weren't properly absorbing into the general fund as appropriate. And what this outlines is a procedures of proper notification and proper accounting and recordation.
do we have an
and-
escheatment issue?
And it will require about $3,000 worth of extra temporary help.
And there's no escheatment, you said, no last
No,
time,
we
right?
we
Mr.
keep
Walsh
we
reminds
keep the money.
It's good to be the government.
And a big
Anybody
smile
have any
there.
questions on this, Mr. Walsh?
These policies and procedures, who are they adopted by? Or is it by you, by the tax office? Does the Board of Selectmen have to approve these policies and procedures? Who approves them? To me, it would seem like they would need to go before the Board of Selectmen for approval. But I'm not sure.
These are policies and procedures that bring the policies and procedures of the department into a line with state statute. I'm not aware of any approval process.
Can we find out from the town attorney, just to be sure that it's done the right way? You don't want to be, I'm happy to hear we're bringing them up to state statute, but I think we should know if somebody's got to vote on them.
Yeah, because clearly we're not going to vote on them.
Right. Anything else on those for now?
Not on this one, no.
Okay. Can we go to item number 2? These look like past entries from last year.
Yes, for the audit ended. Next, I guess, June 5th, the CAFR is on the agenda? Not February 5th, next
Yeah,
next
February
meeting.
5th, right.
Right. I mean, it's I would turn this over to the clerk of the court. If there's any questions.
We were looking for, weren't we looking to see if there were any past adjustments on here related to revenue recognition?
I
Related
thought you were
to-
looking at the payroll liability piece.
There was the payroll and the revenue recognition. So the revenue recognition is not on here. They didn't make any recommendation on that.
For
or
the
pass-
60-day rule?
Yeah,
No, because we made the entry as we always do.
okay. And then, so this is the payroll one related to same issue where you weren't accruing back payroll, right? We were off
The
on
last 2
timing.
weeks in
Yeah.
June were paid in July.
Well, this is basically, we didn't catch it 100%, so there was still a $66,000
Yeah.
difference there, but we did book 1 million?
Yeah.
you know, a little over
$1,200,000,
$1,200,000, $1,300,000. But there was apparently not exact.
And most of these items, as I look at them, they're reclasses more than anything else. right?
Correct.
And I think they're so far under the materiality threshold that
They absolutely
it doesn't
are.
really matter.
Okay. All I have to say is nice job. It's nice when you get something this,
Caitlin is an excellent controller.
anybody have any other questions on that item? Let's go to item number 3, which is the PMA. This is, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, this is a letter from PMA. I don't know if I should have didacted the name. I didn't think about that till this very moment. But it's probably FOI anyway. The issue here was, whoa, all of a sudden we realized last year we needed a big reserve for it. And why was it not reserved? Why didn't we know earlier? Apparently, when summarizing what this letter says is, PMA brought it to the town's attention. The town wasn't certain if maybe it had an excess policy. The town spent some effort and time searching for an excess policy. Somehow it didn't get the information, the final information wasn't determined until until recently when the office became aware of the issue. And but there was no excess policy, and so we needed to jump on this. There's a state statute now that requires excess policy, so this can't happen again.
Do we have that excess
Yes.
policy in place?
Okay, but this claim occurred when the town was fully self-funded without an excess policy.
Mr. Walsh?
What this letter does not answer, though, is why is PMA telling us about this in early 2011? How long did they have our account before then? Why didn't they identify the possibility that we were going to run into this situation? Why didn't they start saying to us earlier, where's your excess, where's your next level of coverage? So we knew whether we had one or we didn't have one. It doesn't address any of those things, which I guess gets down to the reason we talked about the last time, about how did we get into this situation. It's fine that they raised it in early 2011, but how, when we're paying them to monitor all of these claims, are they for the first time saying, hey guys, you have a problem. Oh, by the way, it's kind of a large problem. It's, you know, to the tune of $800,000. And we're just finding that out, so we've had no ability to reserve for that over the years. It just doesn't seem to make sense. There should be some checkoff box on their system that says whether we have the next level of coverage or whether we don't. It would have given us a longer lead time to look for a said policy.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I just don't understand. Their letter doesn't seem to address some of the concerns, at least, that I have
Right.
at all.
The only one of your questions that's easy to address is you can't engage in an excess policy after the event has occurred.
Oh, no, I
So-
know that. That'd be great if we could.
Yes, yeah. PMA, my understanding is they had been monitoring this claim. They had ongoing discussions earlier than 2011, I mean, over the years with finance and HR. And I guess it just kind of came to a head in 2011 as the $2 million policy, which hasn't quite run out, was looking like it was running out. But you can address those specific questions to PMA when they're here for the budget.
All right, could you tell them that they should be fully prepared on this specific claim to address any and all questions and the history of their account with us on this claim?
I will let them know that Mr. Wallace is coming with his guns loaded.
Well, they might want to come with counsel, I don't know.
All right. Any other questions on that item? All right, let's go. Where's item 4? I'm looking.
Item 4 was the request of this board to provide pension plan 3-year pension plan contribution estimates to the RTM. that was done the week after the meeting.
Okay. Let's go to, thank you for that. Let's go to item number 5, business interruption and lost rental coverage. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this? This goes back to the whole conversations regarding insurance coverage in the wake of the storms and where our coverage is kicked in and what we might be able to get, right?
Yeah, and I think also that we have scheduled the insurance broker to be at the February 5th meeting to expand on this information. The only comments I could make of interest right now is, or maybe some of this was already known at the last meeting. I guess there was, I can confirm, I think I mentioned, but there was some question about whether do we have flood insurance? Yes, we do. Do we have excess flood insurance? Yes, we do. The lost rental policy, which I think Mr. Walsh brought up initially, turns out it's only for tenants, and that we're actually calculating the total lost revenue. We're talking six-figure digits in our current calculation, that we will be negotiating. It'd be nice if the insurance company just accepted, but I'm sure there'll be some negotiation there. And then this goes in, again, one of the important things is you have to have, before you have business interruption coverage, there has to be a claim, a property claim. And the only property claim that's above our deductible is Penfield Pavilion. So that's really the chief reason that Penfield Pavilion is the structure of interest.
Okay, any questions, comments on this item, or do we want to hold them for the insurance professionals? Okay. Let's go to item number, thank you. Let's go to item number 6 and 7.
6 is the Mr. Hill retirement agreement expenses. There's straightforward. There were legal fees. As footnoted, of those $19,000, $11,000 of that was rendered in conjunction with follow-up research regarding questions posed by the town bodies. So the actual expense related to the event, if you will, was about $8,000. I think the board has seen the actuarial letter calculating and documenting the $52,000 cost for the retirement step-up. The severance is the calculation of the month's salary times the number of years, I believe. And then the salary savings, we have received the information as to Mr. Hiller's current remuneration from Shelton, and that's gives us a salary savings for the 6-month period of $30,000 for a net total cost of $74,000, of which the $52,000 will go into the ARC over time, and $22,000 will hit this year's activity.
Questions, comments, everybody? Anybody? Okay, I got a couple. So the legal fees are what they are. The retirement step-up, what you're saying there is that's the net present value of the retirement obligation based on stepping up his
Correct.
retirement amount. And I do seem to recall seeing a schedule. I don't remember the details of it.
Yeah.
So reserve the right. This, I'm sure he loves this term, severance. What does this represent?
That is contractual severance when anyone leaves. Per the contract, if you leave not on your own
Right.
volition, there's a calculation, I think, years of service times monthly salary.
So when does that get paid?
That will get paid when we do a true-up, probably, actually, well, could actually end up in next year's, it would be on the final payroll, I would imagine, for activity in June. So it'll get carried over into July a little bit, the actual payment, but
It'll have to be
recorded.
accrued for? It'll have to be accrued for in this current fiscal
Yes.
year, correct?
Yeah. Because he's,
Expensed in fiscal 13.
Yes.
yeah. Okay. And then here, the salary savings one, what we don't have here is, we have salary savings for January through June of, what's that, a part-time salary savings?
No, basically, it's his annual salary, former annual salary at Town of Fairfield minus his current annual salary, Town of Shelton, divided by 2.
Right. What we don't have is what we had to pay him for the 6-month or 4-month period where he was working part-time, right? So this gets offset by that. We were paying him.
There was no increase. He made his regular salary,
Right,
and I made my regular salary.
right. But I guess what
So
I'm
there was
saying
no,
is,
the plus of the, yeah.
right, there was an implied expense for the time we were paying that he wasn't working. That's not reflected on the sheet. It's imputed.
3 days a
right?
week.
I don't think you could record that in the books and records anywhere, but
I'm not saying that.
I
I'm
understand
just
where you're
trying-
coming from.
I'm just trying to get to what the, I'm trying to get to, I'm not playing a game here. I'm trying to get to what the true cost was. And the true cost was the fact that we were paying him for full-time service when he was giving part-time service for 6 months of the year. And we continue to do that now for the next, or for 4 months. We continue to do that now for the next 6 months at a reduced rate net of what he's getting from Shelton.
Correct. This is strictly a dollar cost.
Right. This is strictly in comparison to budget, actually. And dollar cost, I get your point.
Yes.
Okay.
Would we be able to get a revision to this to take that into account?
Take into account,
The fact that he's working 2 days but getting paid for 5?
so 40%.
Right.
What was the salary?
135.
I don't have my calculator with me.
I think you'd also have to do it from the date of the agreement, too, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I think he was he full-time through,
September
September.
15. Yes, sir.
September 15th. So you have to
Yeah.
do it from September 15th on.
right, so 3.5 months. We could, it's an easy calculation to do. I don't have my calculator with me.
Could we have that number calculated and brought back next meeting
Sure.
and put on the sheet? The other question, I guess,
Not sure I want
is,
to put it on the sheet, but I can tell you the number.
but you could break it down by actual cash expenditures out of the budget and then have another section
I'm
to
trying
be lost
hold on a
opportunity
second.
costs.
135 times decimal 6 equals 81. Divided by 1.2 equals 6.75 per month.
So I'll multiply that by
Times
0.5.
3.5 equals 23.625.
I love the way you say decimal. So that would make it about 99K.
And what would it be for the second 6 months? Because it's at a lower amount because we get a credit against what his salary is. So we'd have to do the exact same calculation except do that for 6 months.
Yep. Less 30.
74, what did we just do?
Yeah, you
Oh,
just-
times
you took the-
decimal 6 equals 44.4 divided by 12 equals 3.7 times 6 equals 22.2.
It's about 120 in total. That's both imputed and real. Okay.
Good choice of words.
We have this updated, I don't care if it's in another section of actual cash expenses, but lost opportunity cost, because now this has become a document
Yep,
to our board.
yep. And can we make sure it's noted in the minutes? Thanks.
And that the document be recalculated?
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
And I think there's one other expense, but I don't know really how to put my handle on it. I don't know how anybody else feels, but, you know, Bob's been doing 2 jobs. So, you know, he's been being the chief of staff, and he's been being the chief fiscal officer. And there's, well, it's hard to put a dollar amount on there. You can't. Unless someone's telling me that the fiscal officer should be a half-time job. We're missing one of the other. So it's hard to put in words, or hard to put in numbers, but there is an opportunity cost loss there. Meaning that if the fiscal officer is a full-time job and he's doing that job, and the finance department seems to be running properly, and I think that's great, it's hard to do the chief of staff's job, and maybe to assist the first selectman in doing that job when you're having to run a department, be a department head of another department. It's hard to measure, but we all have to admit that it's happening. So it's nothing that's going to be put down on this page, but it's happening every day.
Yep.
And special projects are probably not getting done that might otherwise, Bob might have had the time to do. And that's part of the loss. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, item number 8, if there's no other questions on that one. Are there any? Sure,
Because
please.
there was 6A, which has not been addressed, which is what's Paul's intentions after December 31st? I presume you've all met with him? And
Well,
what-
he's
what-
working
what are
at,
those
he's
intentions?
working at Shelton, and he's spending 2 days in the office.
So he plans on staying till June 30th, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, sir.
Okay, and what's his salary, so to do that, how you did that calculation of what he's making in Shelton?
What's he make, 75?
Yeah, I think it's 75.
Yeah, 75, 74,361.
Because he's technically part-time there as well.
75,361?
74,361 or 74,631, 74,500.
And how is that verified?
Pay stubs.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, on that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else have any questions on that? All right, item number 7, the capital planning workshop, February 7th.
February 7th,
Who knew?
bring a keg, let's have fun.
Yeah, where are we having that? Is that here?
If my memory serves right, yes.
Yeah, we'll confirm it. Okay, and the schedule of legal costs.
Yeah, this actually was generated based upon this format was generated, or this information was generated based upon a request from Mr. Walsh. And this format was obviously developed internally. Turned out to be a significant help to the current town attorney in helping him formulate his budget. So that was, in those discussions in formulating the budget for 14. So it was good that we did this. But there's the numbers.
So what's the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Polito.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
In the past, we've gotten a more detailed breakdown in terms of the other firms that have done work and what specific projects they are working on. I do see you got the breakdown of McCarter and English at the Metro Center. That's great. I would like to know what specific projects the town and assistant town attorneys are working on. I'm assuming that's just Mr. Lesser, unless there's someone else that I don't know about. And also the other, I would like to have a breakdown of that, just to get a sense of, where our legal dollars are going,
Right.
specific project-wise.
So actually, town assistant attorney, at the beginning of this fiscal year.
Because this is last year.
Right, okay,
Last
my
year.
mistake, right.
Okay.
So that'll be Mr. Saxon.
I thought that had already been, it's my recollection, that documentation that you're requesting.
You may
has
be right
already
about
been-
that. You may be right about
been
that.
distributed.
I'll have to check and see. If you could also locate it
We
and distribute
could
it.
certainly
I
redistribute
appreciate
it.
that. Thank you. Because I know we had a breakdown at some point. Just a comment really more than anything on the total. You know, generally I'm all for attorneys getting paid, obviously, but I got to tell you, this number is astronomical. And I think the town needs to do a better job of leveraging the fees and negotiating the fees, because there are a lot of hungry attorneys out there who are perfectly capable of doing this work and would probably be willing to do it for less to get the work. So I would encourage you, Mr. Tetro, and the administration to consider, you know, specifically with the special counsel. I know that we have a town attorney, that's fine. But with the special projects, I think we could do a better job negotiating those fees down. This seems a little bit, even for the amount of work that was done, being in the business myself, seems a little bit high. So just keep that in mind for the future, please. Thank you.
Walsh, anybody else?
Yeah, I do have some questions. In regards to this, what would be really helpful is, in order to determine where we went off the track, would be to have what the budget was and how it was prepared by the town attorney and the administration to come up with what the budgeted amount was. Now, I know for a fact that the budgeted amount by the first selectman was higher, and that the RTM cut it back. And the question becomes, is how does a town attorney give you these numbers? Does he say, I'm imagining general litigation based on past experience is going to be X. I'm imagining land use work is going to be Y. I'm imagining, because we have all of these contracts coming up at the same time, we're going to need outside legal counsel, and it's going to be another number. It's hard to, even though I see where the numbers are, and certain things are, you know, were clearly outliers. I mean, tax appeals was through $324,000 and change. Was there an amount budgeted for that? And that were, say, $50,000, and we're a great amount above that. I think we got to start looking at that, and if it hasn't been done, I'd like to know, number one, whether it was done in coming up with the budget for the legal services fee, and two, if not, I'm giving advance notice that I'm going to be expecting Attorney Lesser to give us a breakdown when he gives us a number on where he sees it coming in at, based on whether he wants to look back. You know, clearly some of these things hopefully won't be happening again, like the Metro Center legal advice. Like, hopefully the tax appeals are under control and that number's going to be coming down. So I don't know whether you know, Mike, I don't know whether you're in the best position to, as the first selectman, and having him come in for the last budget cycle, whether you know how that's done, whether the town attorney comes into you with a budget and says, Mr. First Selectman, based on past experience, here's where I think the legal budget's going to come in at, in certain areas of legal fees.
Very definitely. I think that what Mr. Mayor said is we're looking at this breakout, going back through and looking at it functionally. So when we come through, or when Attorney Lesser comes through with the budget projection for this year, we'll be able to take a look at those items, and it'll be based on what we estimate the work to be in those areas. Some of that is plannable, as you well know.
Sure.
And some of it is not. So at some point, you're looking at what's our historical trend been.
Yes.
And where are we?
Yeah, but that hasn't been done in the past at all.
I don't know how, we did break things out going into last year's budget, kind of in those functionalities. We looked at run rates, and we looked at what we expected to need for the following year. As you pointed out, we've gotten through most of the tax appeals at this point. The ones that are left are commercial. So just so everybody's clear, there are fewer of them. They're more involved. So there's a reduction, but perhaps not to the same degree. It's not just a pure numbers. It's not like, hey, we've done 100, there's 40 left. Well, that'll be a lot less than the 100. Same issue on the union negotiations. There was a lot of, I'm going to call it first-time through work to get things up and running as part of this. There'll be less of that, but we have quite a few unions coming back up again. We've basically been negotiating. We were 2 to 3 years behind in stepping up. We're finishing those up, but we are going to turn around and start most of them, not all, because we negotiated a couple that are 4-year deals, but we'll be starting most of those again in the spring.
Do you or Ms. Gardner or have any of the documents that went into what the calculation of the budget was last year, so you can put those numbers next to some of them? Now, obviously, McCarter and English, we would have a 0 next to it, because no one saw that exactly coming. But a number next to it for tax appeals, for general litigation, for land use, for labor, and how you did that breakout so that we could put it next to each other and really see where the variances were from last year to now.
Yep. We'll take a look and see if that information is available. You know, it
Okay.
certainly will be going forward, because that's the approach we're taking. We'll see if we still have that detail from last year.
All right, so if you can, I'm going to request that the first selectman come back and give us more information if you can, if it is available to revise the document, if you can. If not, explain why you can't.
All right. Thank you.
I can say that's how it's developed this year.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Okay, good. We look forward, I can't believe I'll say this, to the budget process. Any other
I look forward to
questions,
every night I get
comments
to
on this
spend
item?
with
I think it's good that you're doing it. I just want to thank you
No,
for
you
doing it,
went through-
because
I mean, you're-
having been on the RTM and gone through a number of budgets over the years, it just seemed like the budget would go up by 10%, or sometimes it wouldn't go up at all. It'd be flat at 0 with really no explanation other than it seeming like it was a big guess. And you came away, at least as an attorney, I used to work at a large firm where we would actually budget things that, you know, there were some years where it stayed the same for a couple of years under Mr. Flato, that he was basically telling Mr. Saxel, it appeared, keep the number the same. Do whatever you have to. But there never seemed to be like this kind of budgeting going on for it, and I think it needs to be done, especially as this number continues to grow. So we can look year to year, and you would have more evidence to present to the RTM, who seems sometimes to have a problem with this, on why these numbers are what they are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go on to item number 9, fall earn agreement, and this is the Housing Authority issue.
Yes, yes, sir. Item number 9 is, has a 9 and a 9A, because there was 2 questions, really, or 2 issues. Issue number 1, entertain further dialogue with the Housing Authority as to can they pay, will they pay, shall they pay, how much can they pay? Basically, 2 comments on that. Ms. Martin would be happy to appear before this board, and they have no money to pay us. Their current budget, if you will, anticipates realizing as yet undetermined revenues to be balanced.
Okay, can I start, and then we can go from there? Couple questions here. Just so we're all clear, what's the current outstanding balance they owe to us now?
65,000 approximately.
What is the status of any investigations or matters regarding the Housing Authority right now?
They, it's kind of interesting. We're aware of that case, and the board here might be aware of the case in Shelton, because that's where the former CFO is currently working, right, is part-time, where there was what would appear to many people to be a defalcation, but legal action just moves slowly. The action with the Federal Housing Authority, the potential alleged defalcation, embezzlement, I'm informed consistently. I call up and check every once in a while. Still under investigation, still heavily involved. But there's been no indictments, no arrests, nothing like that.
On our case?
Correct.
See, my view is, I want to stay in line here just in case there is a legal issue that comes out. I think we'd be remiss in not leaving this. Now, we could reserve against it, we talked about that, but I don't want to forgive it. There's a specific request here about forgive it. And by the way, That is in no way saying anything about the existing director, the existing board of directors, their operations as they currently stand, the services they provide to families in our community. That's all. That's not, I'm not besmirching those people, but our job is to protect our taxpayers' rights. And in essence, it looks like the town attorney's telling us the charter was broken.
9A, yes, basically, this,
This was either a loan, it was an expenditure of funds of the town that was not.
both of which were not, either way, it was not authorized.
Right. And second of all, I'm not willing to give up on the fact that if there's somebody held accountable, I don't want somebody coming back and saying, well, they've already kind of stepped out of line. Now, that might be a rudimentary way to look at it. I might be completely wrong, but I just don't think, I'm not willing to let this one go right now. And I'm quite upset about it, and they've had an audit now.
Yes, and basically, they have two liabilities. They owe the federal government $300,000+, and they owe us $65,000. We're in that line.
Small line.
Small line.
Not great company. Okay, so we're in line right now. Do we know, have they had an internal control audit? Have they looked at their management letters? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a brand-new staff.
right.
It's brand-new staff. They've outsourced a lot of stuff, and they're doing some, apparently, what I understand, based on what I hear, some great work. They are right now trying to create some creative ways to leverage their properties to expand and improve and do stuff that, can help them pay things off. Or
Do we have anything to do with them now,
no,
financially?
nothing.
You don't do their payroll?
No payroll, the town used to do payroll, mailing, and other items. The town has no relationship with them now, except an occasional phone call. How's the case going?
Okay. Those are my questions. Mr. Brockfeld?
Yeah, I think this will go back to what we've discussed in the past, but I just want to refresh because this is a new piece, this document here is new for me, I guess, for all of us, right, January 4th. So this basically says that the agreement, the relationship we had in the past where we were processing the payroll and fronting the money was not in accordance with our charter or with our rules and regulations in town?
Correct. I mean, the town could have processed the payroll, but to be legal, it would have had to collect the money
Right.
before it paid money out. The town paid money out and then allowed the liability to build up.
So, I guess aren't I asking the question everybody should be asking? I mean, who approved this? How did this get done? I mean, it's a smaller scandal than the train station, but it's not different. It's just different in scope. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, how could this have happened? And I know, Bob, you're new. You had nothing to do with this, but I'm just asking. Literally, materially, how could this have happened? Something's
I mean,
wrong.
obviously, there's an activity in the finance department. I have no idea of involvement of future past or present first selectman.
How long was this going on, do you know?
I used to have those dates. The activity went on for a while. The liability built up slowly over a couple of years to about 65,000, and then in 2011, it jumped from 65,000 to 165,000. And then there was some alarm and some meetings, and the Housing Authority paid $100,000, actually out of it's paid $100,000, and but have not, made any, payments since then.
Okay.
I think
Go ahead.
Caitlin wanted to say something.
No, go
Do you
ahead.
have something?
Yeah, I don't know when it began. I know in our systems it was prior to 99.
Prior to what?
Prior to 99, it had been going on.
1999?
Yeah.
Right. And from like 99 to 2009 or something like that, the liability kind of there was always a liability,
was
or
always
a
a
receivable. There was always a receivable, The receivable built up, like I said, to about 65,000, and then in '09, '10, it jumped from 65 to 165.
So I guess, let me ask a different question, I guess. I'm grappling, I'm just trying, I apologize, I'm grasping at this. Anybody else wants to jump in? But, so, Tom, I think you've brought up an excellent point, which is that we shouldn't be forgiving this for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that if there is legal action in the future that might lead us to recover some of this money, we want to be in line and be expecting that payment. Is that what you're saying? So
Exactly.
that makes perfect sense. I don't know how we could argue with that. But the second point is, don't we want to take a look at our procedures internally? And I understand that the people who may or may not be responsible for this may not even still be here, but shouldn't we be asking ourselves how this could happen? In other words, what are the procedures and policies that we have that would allow us to front hundreds of thousands of dollars to an organization and write their checks and so forth? I mean,
I totally agree.
how it could happen. I mean, there's a lack of control here somewhere
I-
in our past.
Well, I
I'm just-
agree with this specific situation, that there probably should be a policy that we don't fund outside organizations. Just as we have this
Well,
other
this-
policy that we had earlier that we discussed.
Right.
There probably should be a policy that says that,
So you're saying
without
is
the
it in-
consent
So
of.
you're saying not just an interpretation, but an actual written policy?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's in the charter, thou shalt not expend unauthorized funds.
Well, exactly, that's what I was, yeah.
Let me ask you about one other payroll processing that we do for the parking authority.
Tell us about that.
In effect, it's the same, it hits an expense on their books, but they're using our cash and we bill them quarterly. So in
Quarterly
effect,
in
if they had
arrears.
stopped paying us, it had
Right.
been expensed in their own fund, but we do have a receivable from them.
So it's quarterly in arrears,
Yeah,
is what it is?
yeah. And that's what we had been doing with housing as well. That's the only reason why it makes me think of it. Every quarter, we would send them a report saying, you owe us this. And I know that we're getting the parking authority money because I'm actually grabbing their money through a wire transfer, but then they would just start slowly paying us less than what they owed us.
We don't use an outside payroll service, correct?
No.
You function as their payroll service.
Right. And they pay us for it. They reimburse us for our services. So it's a little different than housing was
How
pro
often
bono.
do they get paid?
Weekly.
Weekly?
I think we'll start billing them in advance starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, it is expensed somewhere, so, and
Right.
they do have an operating budget per se, but we are, in theory, expending funds that are not ours.
Caitlin, what's the magnitude? I mean, what are we exposed?
Well, we're also doing that on their AP as well, so it's not just
So
payroll.
what would
I'm
be
just-
the approximate exposure, for example? You know, there's obviously an interim period between when you put the money out and you get your quarterly payment from them.
If I had to guess,
Yeah. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
I'd say 30 grand a month, maybe.
Okay. A month, so over $100,000 in.
Yeah, but then there's a lot of monies that flow in between us. They pay us rent for their parking lots, so there's a quarterly, for the DuPont lot, they pay us quarterly, so there's.
But that's for a reason. I mean, but the reality is you have, if what you're saying is quarterly, so there's almost $100,000 of.
Yeah, I'm making up that number.
exposure.
I could get back
No,
to you.
I'm not trying to
but
pin you on the exact number.
Yeah.
It could be less than that.
I was not aware we were doing this, this is new news to me, but, it's kind of like when we make accounts payable payments, and they go through a sweep account at the bank requires that the funds be deposited
Well,
before
exactly.
they cash the checks. From my perspective, we should be treating even though the parking authority is a related party, and we're aware of what's going on over there, I don't see personally right now, and I know they have funds, so it seems to me we should not entertain, I think we'll start discussing with them immediately, converting to a more prospective remuneration. The difference, I guess, between what's happening here and what happened with the housing is the housing authority over the years built up a balance which was greater than any payroll, and and then continued building it up, as opposed to the housing authority. The parking authority apparently is paying their bills.
Well, I mean, what's really amazing about the story, and the more we talk about it, is that flags were never, red flags were rising literally on a weekly or biweekly or whatever basis?
For the housing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was running through a balance sheet account, and it really never hit the materiality level of the auditor,
Right,
so
I'm
it
just saying
really...
nobody ever, okay, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the parking authority,
You know, I'm
please-
going to revise my 100, now that I'm thinking about it. I think it's about 10 grand a month.
yeah, I think you should.
There's only one full-time employee.
Do you have
and there's
access to
part-timers.
their cash?
Yeah,
Okay, so you're controlling their bank account.
yeah.
So when you say you're taking the money in arrears, you're just recording, you could basically take the money whenever you wanted.
Yeah, it's an internal wire transfer within People's Bank, yeah.
Right. Now, you never had access to the housing authority. They would actually have to initiate payment.
Correct.
See, there's the difference.
Yeah.
Big difference, yeah.
There's a huge difference there because it's control of the funds. Mr. Brown?
But what we're hearing is with the Housing Authority, the way that was being handled was in violation of the charter.
Yeah.
Is that the case with the Parking Authority?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I don't know.
The fact, it sounds like it's administrative, for lack of a better way to put it. If you control the funds, you can actually take the funds whenever you
Yeah.
want. Now, you can also check the funds whenever you want and make sure there's enough there. So you can actually do, to Mr. Mayor's point, you treat it like a sweep account. You can sweep it out before and then pay it. Or you can do it and pay the check. In essence, you're paying with their funds. Whereas in the housing authority situation, they actually had to initiate payment to us. We couldn't go in and grab their funds. So this, it sounds like a much easier fix to me than the housing authority. You actually needed to depend on somebody
In
else.
theory, I could go grab their cash. I know that I have just administratively internal wire transfers. There's a limit of how many I could do.
Right, right, right. So with the parking authority, you have access and can go in and grab it.
Yeah.
Right. Can you just report back on what you guys have decided on that? That
Yeah.
seems a less of concern because of the control of the cash. Yeah.
It seems like if you could do it once a month after you know what the payroll was for the month, we'd only be exposed then if there wasn't, you could report, hey, they don't have any money to make this month's payment, go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we got a problem here, immediately. And
Instead of doing it quarterly.
instead of doing it quarterly, just do it monthly, every month.
I could. They have an annual permitting process, so I know the money's there.
Yeah.
But, yeah. It's
I
probably
mean, I guess
just-
we could also, with the annual permitting now, you could almost take the whole amount out what you expected it to be for the year.
Well, then
dump
I'd
it-
have to keep track of actual. Most
Yeah.
of the dollars is part-timers, and
This way, if you knew every month what the payroll exactly was, every month, pop it out,
Yeah.
and then this way, we'd only be exposed if, for some reason, they withdrew their own money somehow, and there was no money there for you to take out that first month. We'd only be exposed for a month, which...
Yeah, I think everything that you're saying is correct. Everything, Mr. Flynn, that you said is correct. I can't think of any reason administratively, though, not to just, to address Mr. Brown's issue and correct the situation, and then use the sweeping
Yeah.
account approach.
Yeah. And I understand, Bob, what you were saying about taking it out in advance, but once again, you have the truing up of it every month, which seems to be more problems. I mean, with the safety of what's gone on and our history with them and having access to their account, it just seems like if we pop it out every month, once we know what the amount is, we'd always be true. So there's no adjustments made at at the end or anything. You're taking out exactly what we paid out.
Right, we basically what we do is we run the payroll, here's the amount, transfer the money, send out the check.
Exactly.
Exactly, you're right.
Well, I'm saying if I did that weekly, we would incur fees, is what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
I'd prefer to
once a
do it
month.
monthly.
I think monthly would be, I personally think, you guys can make up your own policy on it, but I think monthly, to cut down on the amount of time involved in it and the safety of it, once a month would be sufficient, I would think, so.
Are there any other entities or anything like that that you know of?
No.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I'm just glad that you brought this up, that we addressed this one.
Yeah.
And thanks for bringing that one up now.
Thank you for that. All right. I think we're done with that item. So we're on to item 7, to hear, consider, and act on any other communications. I don't think I have any. Do you guys? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Mr. Belito, do I have a second? I'm going to go with Mr. Brown. All in favor of adjournment? All opposed? And we are adjourned. And who said we couldn't get done by 11?